My boss fired me over petty reasons, so I bankrupted her project. I thought I had just landed the opportunity of a lifetime. A job in video content creation for a well-known university, right at the dawn of YouTube becoming a serious tool for branding. It was the early 2010s, and back then, not many people were doing this kind of work. Most businesses still saw video as a luxury, not a necessity. But this university wanted to be ahead of the curve, and I was excited to be part of that. The pay wasn't great, about $2,200 a month, but I figured it was worth it to get my foot in the door. I imagined making sleek educational videos, working with smart people, and building something meaningful. But that dream started to fall apart on my second day. That's when my manager handed me my key performance indicators, or KPI. She wanted 85 videos, each between 3 to 10 minutes, delivered within 52 weeks. And just to be clear, I was the entire team. There was no writer, no editor, no camera crew, just me. One person expected to script, film, cast talent, compose original music, and edit full productions from scratch. It didn't help that the equipment they gave me was basically garbage. The university's computers couldn't handle basic HD rendering, and their cameras looked like they belonged in a museum. So I ended up using my own gear, my own editing software, my own camera. Even for music, they were too cheap to pay for. Royalty-free tracks. So I had to compose background music myself. Every single video was a mountain of work, and I was climbing that mountain alone. Naturally, I went to my manager and told her the KPI was impossible. Not difficult, not challenging. Literally impossible for one person with no budget and a pile of ancient gear. But she just smiled and said, "Don't worry, just try your best. We care more about quality than quantity." That reassurance was all I needed at the time. I believed her. I genuinely thought I could make it work. I figured if I put in the hours, stayed focused, and delivered amazing content, everything would be okay. Looking back now, that was the first sign I was being set up. I just didn't realize it yet. For the first few weeks, things were smooth. My manager was friendly, upbeat, and seemed genuinely supportive. She complimented my work ethic, praised the early drafts I delivered, and even brought me coffee once, or twice. It felt like I had joined a team that valued creativity. That illusion didn't last long. It all changed one afternoon when she walked past me on my break and saw me lighting a cigarette. She didn't say anything at the time, just kept walking. But I remember the shift in her eyes. Cold, judgy, dismissive, like something had just clicked for her, and I was suddenly less human in her eyes. Later, I casually mentioned it to a colleague during lunch. She winced. "You smoke?" "Oh, no." I asked her what she meant, and she just sighed. "Our manager hates smokers. Not like thinks it's unhealthy, hates them, like tries to get them fired. You're probably on her blacklist now." I laughed at first, thinking that was ridiculous. But it wasn't long before the nitpicking started. Suddenly, I was getting emails about the smell of smoke on my clothes, even though I smoked outside, far from the building. She began calling me out for being 5 minutes late, despite the fact that I stayed at least 4 extra hours every day without being asked. She complained that I wasn't reachable during my legally mandated breaks. At one point, she even implied I was unreliable, despite me never missing a deadline or failing to deliver a video. Every little thing became a problem. She never said anything outright about the smoking again, but it was clear. I'd been marked. Still, I kept my head down. I wasn't there to win a popularity contest. I just wanted to do the job well. I kept pushing, churning out as many quality videos as I could with limited resources, and even more limited patience for her new behavior. But no matter what I did, it was never enough. She never offered feedback, just silence or criticism. And I began to notice something else. She never actually helped. Not with approvals, not with talent recruitment, not even with uploading finished videos. She was just watching and waiting. And I was starting to feel like the only reason she hired me was to eventually throw me under the bus. The worst part? I still believed in the work. I still believed that if I could just hit the right rhythm, I could prove my worth. But my manager had already made up her mind. 5 months into the job, after grinding day and night to produce high-quality content, I got called into the director's office. I wasn't given a reason. Just a "please come upstairs." I walked in to find my manager already there, sitting across from the director with the fakest expression of concern I've ever seen. It was that perfect blend of, "I'm so disappointed," and "I'm secretly thrilled this is happening." My stomach dropped. The director didn't waste any time. "We've reviewed your performance," she said, "and we're disappointed in the progress." She pointed out that we were nearly halfway through the year, and I had only completed 30 of the 85 required videos. The implication was clear. I was failing. I tried to explain. I told them I was working 6 days a week, clocking over 60 hours regularly, that I was using my own gear because theirs was too outdated to handle even 720p rendering, that I was writing, filming, editing, and publishing everything on my own. I reminded them the videos I had produced were outperforming all previous university content. The view counts alone were higher than anything they had on their YouTube channel. And most importantly, I quoted my manager directly, that she had said she cared about quality over quantity. The director's face was blank. My manager, sitting next to her, had the audacity to smirk. "Well," the director said, "the KPI is still 85 videos. That's non-negotiable." I felt like I had been slapped. This wasn't about performance. This was about making an example out of me. I wasn't falling short because I was lazy or incompetent. I was falling short because the job was designed to be unwinnable from the start. But the final blow came when I asked, "So what's your plan? How do you expect to meet the KPI if I'm gone?" That's when my manager, without missing a beat, snorted and said, "We'll find a professional production house to finish your work." The way she emphasized professional made it crystal clear this had been her plan all along. Hire someone cheap, burn them out, then replace them with a company that could do the work for more money, but with none of the pushback. The director gave her a brief, uncomfortable glance, but still nodded in agreement. "Manager will get the job done," she said. And that's when it clicked. If they were going to bring in a production house, they'd have to rely on the vendor database, the one I had built, the one only I had access to. And in that moment, as I stood up and walked out of the room, I wasn't angry. I was inspired. If they wanted a professional production house, I was about to give them one, just not in the way they expected. Back at my desk, I didn't pack up right away. Instead, I opened the vendor database I had personally compiled. My manager didn't know the industry. She didn't have contacts in production. She hadn't contributed to this list at all, and now she was planning to use it to replace me. So I made a few changes. One by one, I went down the list of production houses. I scrambled the phone numbers, altered the emails, and edited the contact names. Nothing too obvious, just enough to make them unusable, except one. There was one company I left untouched, and that was very intentional. A close friend of mine worked there. He wasn't some assistant or intern. He was a junior director, someone assigned to lead smaller video projects, but still with real influence. I called him up and laid out my plan. "This university's about to panic hire a production team to replace me," I said, "and they're going to come to your company because I'm making sure you're the only real contact left in the system." He was stunned for a second. "Are you serious?" I was, and I wasn't done. "I'll walk you through exactly how to pitch them," I said. "I'll give you a step-by-step playbook on what they want to hear, the style they expect, even the buzzwords they use internally. You'll be their perfect match." He hesitated. "What's in it for you?" "Standard industry finder's fee," I replied. 15% of whatever the job's worth." He didn't even blink. Done. Within the hour, I was on a conference call with his general manager. Once he heard this contract could be worth high 6 figures, covering months of work. For a prestigious institution, he greenlit it on the spot and had the paperwork drafted. Over the next few days, I worked with my friend behind the scenes. I fed him exactly what to say, which themes to highlight, how to position his team as the university's salvation. And when the meeting day came, they walked into that pitch room and delivered a masterclass. My former manager and the director were stunned. Here was a team that understood the university's goals, knew the tone of the previous videos, even referenced past stylistic choices, like they had done work with the school before. It was seamless. They signed the contract almost immediately, and just like that, the university thought they had landed the perfect replacement. But they had no idea they'd just stepped into my trap. From the outside, it looked like everything was going according to plan for my old manager. The university now had a professional production house with a full team. Producers, directors, editors, gaffers, sound designers, even assistants. No more depending on a one-man crew. They were finally doing it right. But what they didn't realize was just how expensive doing it right really was. Each video produced by my friend's team cost 2 to 3 times my monthly salary, and they were efficient, painfully efficient. With a proper crew, they could finish a polished, high-quality video every 2 to 3 days. That meant 50 videos in just 4 months. What had taken me 5 months to create Solo, they were cranking out like clockwork, because they had the tools and manpower. The university was thrilled, my manager especially. She paraded the success like it had been her idea all along. She took credit for bringing in the new team, talked about how she turned things around, and made herself look like the savior of the entire project. Meanwhile, I was sitting back and enjoying my well-earned payout. See, that 15% finder's fee I negotiated wasn't just some casual handshake agreement. It was contractual, signed and sealed before the pitch even happened. And since the university was paying a high 6-digit amount for the project, my cut added up to about 15 months' worth of my old salary. That was more than a year of pay for a job I no longer had to do. With the money, I booked myself a trip to Bali and used the rest to apply to a prestigious film school overseas. It was the kind of opportunity I never would have had if I'd stayed locked in that toxic job. The same job that had undervalued me, overworked me, and tossed me out like trash the moment I became inconvenient. At the time, I thought that was the end of the story. I'd gotten my revenge. I'd helped my friend get promoted. I'd gotten paid. Case closed. But the universe wasn't quite done yet. A few weeks into my Bali vacation, I was lying on a beach chair with a drink in my hand, when my phone buzzed. It was a message from a former coworker, the same one who had warned me months earlier about my manager's hatred for smokers. Her message simply said, "You're going to want to hear this." I called her immediately, and what she told me made my entire week. Apparently, the university's upper administration had just discovered the final cost of the content creation project, the one I was fired from. The project had originally been budgeted at about a year and a half of my salary. That's all they had allocated for video production. But thanks to my manager's brilliant decision to hire a full-blown production house at premium rates, the budget had been exceeded by over 10 times. That's not a typo. 10 times. The chancellor of the university was furious. Nobody had signed off on that level of spending. The director had no idea just how much money had been authorized because my former manager had pushed it through herself, desperate to hit the KPI and prove she didn't need me. She approved every invoice, every production cost, every little add-on and rush fee without blinking. And in doing so, she destroyed the entire budget. The content may have been completed, but the price tag? Catastrophic. The fallout was swift. My former manager was fired. Not quietly. Not after a performance review or with a nice severance. She was dragged into an emergency meeting and dismissed. Her arrogance, her personal vendettas, and her financial recklessness had caught up with her. The director, too, didn't walk away unscathed. While she kept her job, she was humiliated. The chancellor reprimanded her publicly in front of senior staff, questioning how she had allowed such an overrun under her watch. Her reputation took a massive hit, and from what I heard, she never really recovered. All of this happened while I was lounging by the ocean, sipping cocktails and planning my next big move. That's when it hit me. I didn't just get revenge. I flipped the entire power dynamic. They fired me to save money, and I ended up costing them more than they ever imagined. I never imagined that getting fired would be the best thing that ever happened to me. With 15 months' worth of salary sitting comfortably in my bank account, I paid off some debts, booked another vacation, and secured my admission into a top-tier film school abroad. The kind of school I used to dream about but never thought I could afford. Now, thanks to my ex-manager's ego and a perfectly executed plan, it was within reach. As for my friend, the one whose company I funneled the project to, that contract became his golden ticket. His company was so impressed with how he landed the deal and executed the project that they promoted him from junior director to full director within weeks. He later told me that signing that university job elevated his standing across the entire local production scene. It was the biggest win of his career at that point. Meanwhile, back at the university, they were left to clean up the wreckage. The content creation campaign was technically complete, but the cost had shattered every expectation. The budget had exploded, leadership credibility was in shambles, and they were left with no one to blame but themselves. And me? I never had to say a word. No public takedown, no online rant. Just quiet, clean revenge that paid out in cash and karma. I had walked in, wanting to create great work, and left with my dignity, my wallet full, and 2 careers elevated, mine and my friends. It was poetic, really. They thought I was disposable, replaceable. But they forgot one important thing: you don't mess with the person who built the system, especially when they know how to break it. And now, on to the next story. A Christmas gift turned into war against a retail giant. I'm just a regular guy. Married, father of a 9-year-old, and like many families, we were doing our best to make Christmas feel magical. My wife and I are both on disability, which means the holidays aren't just stressful, they're a budgeting battlefield. Every euro is counted, every gift carefully chosen. And this past Christmas, we wanted to get our son something special, something that would light up his face and give him joy long after the wrapping paper was gone. So we picked a football rebounder. You know, one of those trampoline-like nets where a kid kicks the ball and it comes flying back. For a little boy obsessed with football, it was perfect. We ordered it from a well-known UK sports retailer, one that operates in both the UK and Ireland. We even made sure to use their Irish website, thinking it would avoid any cross-border nonsense. It was a straightforward online order. Nothing shady, no third-party sellers, just a regular checkout on what looked like a local, reputable site. We got the confirmation, the payment went through, and everything seemed fine. No warnings, no extra fees, no red flags, just a parent doing their best to make Christmas morning sparkle. At the time, we had no idea that this innocent little purchase would ignite a full-scale battle with a corporate giant, one that would drag on for days and expose just how little some companies care about their customers until they're publicly embarrassed. But that war hadn't started yet. At that moment, we were just two exhausted parents, feeling good about the gift we'd chosen. It was one less thing to worry about, or so we thought. A few days later, the buzz of holiday prep was in full swing when my wife got a message. It was from a courier company, the kind with brown uniforms, claiming we owed nearly $50 in customs fees for a delivery. At first, we both laughed it off. We've ordered enough over the years to know that these kinds of texts often scream scam. Besides, Christmas shopping was done. There wasn't anything left we were waiting on, especially not something that would be coming from overseas. Still, something didn't sit right. We double-checked our order history just to be sure. And that's when it hit us. The only package unaccounted for was the football rebounder. Confused, my wife picked up the phone and called the sports retailer's customer service. After some back and forth, they admitted the truth. The item had shipped from the UK, not Ireland, and passed through a local courier before being handed over to the brown-uniformed guys, and just like that, a supposedly local purchase turned into a cross-border import, one that came with a nearly $50 customs fee we had never agreed to, never been warned about, and certainly didn't budget for. For a family on a fixed income, especially during the holidays, that amount isn't just inconvenient. It's painful, but we didn't want to disappoint our son. We didn't want him waking up on Christmas morning and wondering why Santa didn't come through, so we paid it. My wife covered the charge, and I told her not to worry. I'd handle the company. I wasn't looking for a fight. I just wanted what was fair. After all, under Irish consumer law, any additional charges must be clearly stated before the purchase is completed. And not once, not during checkout, not in the confirmation email, did they mention this fee. Not even a hint. That made it not just unfair, it made it illegal. The next morning, I rolled up my sleeves and got to work. I wasn't looking to argue. I just wanted someone to listen, someone with the authority to do the right thing. I figured a quick call would sort it out. Maybe they'd refund the customs fee, maybe they'd offer a proper explanation. I'd worked in a call center before. I knew how the system worked. Be patient, be polite, and speak to someone who can actually fix the issue. But that turned out to be wishful thinking. The first call started promising enough, polite rep, standard apologies, but it ended with a 20-minute hold, followed by a promise of a callback that never came. Fine. I tried again. Same result. Long hold, no solution, no manager, just the hollow reassurance that someone will be in touch. By the third call, I wasn't just annoyed, I was getting angry. 3 attempts, 3 separate reps, and still no resolution. Each time I had to explain everything all over again, like Groundhog Day with worse hold music. I asked, again, to speak with the supervisor. I made it clear I wasn't looking to vent. I just wanted my $50 back. But even that simple request seemed like too much to ask. I stayed calm, even as my patience thinned. I didn't curse, didn't yell, but I made sure they knew I wasn't going away. And yet, once again, all I got was, someone will contact you. That someone never did. That's when I realized. They weren't just ignoring me. They were hoping I'd go away, hoping I'd let it slide because it was just $50. But what they didn't realize, what they always underestimate, is that when you back a decent person into a corner, especially during Christmas, especially when their child is involved, you don't get silence. You get fire. On day 3, I wasn't just calling for a refund. I was calling to draw a line. No more polite patience. No more waiting for callbacks that never came. This time, I was prepared. I had checked the law, screenshotted their checkout process, and tested the website again. I even simulated a fresh purchase of the same item to see if anything had changed. And guess what? Still no warning, no alert about potential customs fees, not even in the fine print, nothing. According to Irish consumer law, that made their practice not just sneaky, it made it a breach of my rights. When I finally got a rep back on the line, I laid it all out. I explained the law. I explained the lack of transparency. I explained how I had proof that at no point were we told about additional charges. I wasn't being unreasonable, I was being exact. The response? He offered me a $20 gift voucher, a measly €20 coupon to use on their website, after I'd already been forced to shell out €50 we hadn't planned to spend. And then he read me some pre-written statement about delivery duty unpaid charges possibly applying to international shipments. I stopped him mid-sentence. Where does it say that? I asked. There was a pause, long enough to be awkward. I don't know, he admitted. That was it. The final insult. Not only had they hit us with a hidden fee, but now they were hiding behind policies they couldn't even point to. I told the rep calmly but firmly that they had one last chance to make this right. Not tomorrow. Not next week. I want your manager to call me within the next 60 minutes, I said, or I'm going to take this public, and I will tag every senior officer in your company while I do it. Then I hung up and waited, and of course, the phone stayed silent. They called my bluff, and that was their biggest mistake, because when I said I'd go public, I meant it. I wasn't bluffing. I wasn't empty threat angry. I was calm, calculated, and done being ignored. So I logged onto LinkedIn, took a deep breath, and began crafting a post that would become a very public declaration of war. I laid everything out, the hidden fees, the deceptive checkout process, the broken promises of callbacks, and the laughable $20 voucher they offered as a bandage for their mistake. But I didn't stop there. I tagged them. Not just the company, I tagged every senior officer I could find, regional managers, European directors, right up to the CEO. And I didn't just call them out, I shamed them. I asked how a company could operate this way, especially during the holidays. I reminded them that we weren't just a customer service case. We were a real family, scraping by on disability, trying to make Christmas work for our kid. I made it personal because it was personal. And the post? It started to take off. People noticed. Not just random users either. 3 anonymous views appeared on my LinkedIn profile. You know the ones. LinkedIn member in incognito mode. No names, no titles. But I wasn't born yesterday. I knew exactly who those viewers were. So I took screenshots of those profile visits and added them to my post. Looks like someone's watching, I wrote. But still no phone call. Funny how you've got time to stalk, but not to solve the problem. Then something strange happened. The rebounder, the exact item we ordered, disappeared from their website. They were trying to hide it, as if scrubbing the product page would somehow erase what they did. But I wasn't done. I searched rebounder on their site and saw it still came up in the product list, even though the individual page now showed an error. Then I ran a Google cache search and found the original product page from just 2 days earlier, so I screenshotted all of it. The item in the store listings, the blanked-out product page, the cached version proving it was there, and then I added those to my LinkedIn post, too. This was no longer just about $50. This was about accountability. Once that post started gaining traction, I could almost hear the gears turning inside their corporate offices. The scramble, the panic, the damage control. Because while they weren't replying to me directly, they were definitely watching and trying, in their own quiet, clumsy way, to erase the evidence. First came the disappearing act, the rebounder. The same product that had triggered this whole mess vanished from their website. Not a sold-out notice, not a back in stock soon, just gone, as if it had never existed. They must have thought I wouldn't notice, or maybe they thought I didn't know how to dig. But I've been on the internet long enough to know one simple truth: nothing ever really disappears. So I went to work. I searched for rebounder in their store's search bar, and sure enough, there it was. Still listed, just without a functioning product page. Then I jumped on Google and did a cached search. 2 clicks later, I had the full product page exactly as it had appeared 2 days prior. Price, description, SKU, all still live on the back end. I took screenshots of everything. The listing still appearing, the blank product page, the cached version proving they had tried to scrub it, and then I went back to LinkedIn and dropped it all into the comments under my original post. Trying to hide the item now, I wrote, "Too late. You've already been caught." And once again, I tagged the senior team. All of them. From directors to executives to department heads. I wasn't shouting into the void anymore. I was dragging them into the spotlight, not with rage, with receipts, and the post kept growing. More views, more comments, more attention. People were sharing it, engaging, asking questions. It wasn't just a complaint anymore. It was a public case study in how not to handle your customers. Then came the cherry on top. Remember those 3 mysterious LinkedIn member profile views I mentioned earlier? I posted about them too. I said, "Hey, I see you. Feel free to reach out anytime instead of lurking." It was petty, it was pointed, and it was deserved. Because what they hadn't realized, what so many corporations never seem to grasp, is that one quiet customer can suddenly become very loud when pushed far enough, and that noise was about to get results. The next morning, my phone rang. Not a scam call, not a courier. A senior executive from the company's UK head office was on the line, and she sounded like she was calling from a house that was on fire. Her voice was full of apologies, urgent, nervous. She said she'd seen my LinkedIn post, that it had been escalated, that they took it seriously. "You don't say?" She asked me, almost pleadingly, what she could do to make things right. I'll be honest, at that point, I had already won. The post had gone viral enough to make them squirm, but I also remembered what this whole mess had cost us. Not just $50, but time, stress, frustration, and worst of all, a holiday season nearly derailed over a company's indifference. So I told her plainly, I originally just wanted my $50 back. But now, you ignored me for days. You dismissed me. You tried to hide the problem. So now I want the $50 refunded. I want the entire purchase refunded. And I want to keep the product. That's the only way this goes away. She paused. Then, she said she needed a couple of hours to see what she could do. I said, "Take your time. I'll wait." Less than an hour later, she called back. Her tone had shifted. Not just apologetic, almost deferential. She said she had spoken to the necessary departments, and here's what they were doing. She was sending $50 directly to my PayPal. She was issuing a full refund on the original purchase, and we could keep the football rebounder. No return required. She even thanked me for bringing this to their attention. At that moment, I thanked her, too. Not because I was grateful for their sudden generosity, but because I knew something she didn't. They hadn't done this to make it right. They did it to shut me up, and that's fine. Because either way, we won. We got our money back. We kept the gift, and most importantly, we didn't let them walk all over us. In the end, this wasn't just about a $50 customs charge. It wasn't even about a football rebounder. It was about a system that counted on people staying quiet. A company that thought they could slip hidden fees through the cracks, shrug off accountability, and hope their customers wouldn't notice or wouldn't bother fighting back. But they picked the wrong customer. I'm just one man. I don't have a legal team. I don't have a platform or a PR agency. I have a wife, a son, and a very real understanding of how much $50 means to a family living on a fixed income, especially at Christmas. And let me tell you something. My son's view of Santa, his belief in something magical during a time of year that should feel warm and safe, that matters more to me than a company's public image. So when they tried to sweep us aside, I pushed back, not with rage, with facts, not with insults, with evidence, not with silence, with a voice they couldn't ignore. They thought they could bury the problem, hide the product page, bury the complaint in endless hold music. But what they got was a storm they never saw coming. A father who refused to be dismissed, and a LinkedIn post that reached the boardroom before their customer service team ever did. And in the end, they didn't just refund me. They learned a lesson. Sometimes the quietest customers have the loudest impact. So here's the real takeaway. The thing I hope sticks with anyone listening. Don't let anyone, no matter how big or powerful, trample over your rights. Because sometimes all it takes is one voice, one post, and one very determined dad to remind a corporate giant what accountability really looks like. And now, on to the next story. My middle school bully lost his Pokemon collection to me years later. I was just looking for some cheap knickknacks, A couple old books, maybe, or a dusty board game that'd bring back childhood memories. That Saturday morning, I had no idea I was about to stumble into the most satisfying revenge of my life. At a garage sale of all places. I had just graduated college and was back in my hometown for a few months before starting a job across the country. One of my favorite ways to kill time was to check out neighborhood garage sales. You never know what you'll find, right? So there I was, driving slowly through the streets I used to walk as a kid when I pulled up to a house that looked oddly familiar. It took me a second, but then it hit me. This was his house, Derek's house. I hadn't thought about him in years, but the memory came rushing back like I was still 13 and angry. I almost drove off, but something stopped me. Maybe it was curiosity, maybe it was fate. Either way, I parked the car. I walked up the driveway and immediately noticed a stack of colorful paper napkins with Pikachu on them. Pokemon napkins. I picked one up, pretending to inspect it casually. That's when she spoke. Oh, my son. Used to be obsessed with Pokemon for years. We're finally getting rid of all his junk. It was Derek's mom. She looked exactly the same. Maybe a few more wrinkles, a little more gray in her hair. But she didn't recognize me. Glasses and a beard really do work wonders. I nodded and told her the napkins were cute. Said I had a younger cousin who was really into Pokemon. That wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the full truth either. Then I asked the million-dollar question. You have any other Pokemon stuff? She tilted her head. I think there are a couple of boxes in the attic with some of his old games and cards, but I didn't think anyone would still want that kind of thing. I held my breath. I can bring them down if you want to look through them. And just like that, I stepped inside the house I thought I'd never enter again. The home of the kid who once made my life miserable over a phone plan. To understand why this moment meant so much to me, you have to know what Derek did. It wasn't the kind of bullying you'd see in a movie, no wedgies or locker slams. Derek was smarter than that, mean in the way only a manipulative, attention-seeking 7th grader could be. We were in middle school in the early 2010s, back when smartphones hadn't completely taken over yet. I had my first phone, a clunky slide phone, on a pay-as-you-go plan. 10 cents per text or call, a quarter for every picture message. I had exactly $100 per year to use. That was it. If I went over, it came out of my birthday or Christmas. Money. It was strict, but it taught me how to manage my usage down to the penny. My friends were pretty cool about it. They'd call and let it ring once, then I'd call them back on a landline. We used email or Skype for pretty much everything else. They respected the limitations. But Derek? He didn't care. Derek joined our friend group in 7th grade and things went downhill fast. At first, he came off as funny and high energy, but it didn't take long for the cracks to show. He stirred up drama, turned people against each other, and always made himself the victim. Somehow he was charming to adults, so teachers and parents never saw what we saw. That made cutting ties with him harder than it should have been. He was also the only one who didn't respect my phone situation. I explained it more than once. Please don't send me pictures, they cost me money. But Derek didn't listen. He thought it was hilarious to send me stupid memes and photos constantly. And with picture messages costing 25 cents each, even just a few texts could wipe out a big chunk of my balance. One day, he got mad at me, I don't even remember why, and decided to go nuclear. He spammed my phone with picture after picture, meme after meme. I lost count somewhere after 100 messages. My phone didn't even work after a while because he had completely drained my balance. I remember checking and seeing that I had just $40 left on that phone. Gone. Just like that. I was furious. I told Derek he owed me $40, at least. He laughed. Said it wasn't his problem, that I should just get a better phone. I went home livid. I told my dad, hoping he'd call Derek's mom and demand she pay for the damage, but he just shook his head. It's not worth the battle, he said. Even when I brought up small claims court, he told me, some fights just aren't worth the energy. Still, he took me to the carrier store, reloaded my plan, and forced the staff to block Derek's number, even though they originally claimed it wasn't possible. I'll never forget how he stood there, calmly but firmly, refusing to leave until they figured it out. That summer, we finally got a family plan. Unlimited texts, a new number, a clean slate. But the damage was already done, and I never forgot. The $40 Derek took from me wasn't just about money. It was about disrespect. It was knowing someone went out of their way to hurt you, and they got away with it. But karma has a funny way of balancing things out. Sometimes it just takes a while. By the end of 7th grade, everyone was tired of Derek's games. The constant manipulation, the lies, the backstabbing, it finally caught up to him. One big fight blew everything apart. I don't even remember what sparked it, but it ended with the whole friend group cutting him off completely. He tried to worm his way back in, acted confused, played the victim like always, but no one bought it anymore. The social tide had turned. In 8th grade, Derek was a complete outcast. No one wanted to deal with him. He switched schools the next year, and just like that, he disappeared from our lives. It should have felt like closure, and it did, for a while. But in the back of my mind, that $40 still haunted me. Not because I missed the money, but because I never got to make things right. Never got to prove that what he did wasn't okay. My dad had been right. Fighting over $40 wasn't worth it back then. But now, standing in his house with the attic ladder pulled down and dusty boxes waiting above me, now it felt like the universe was finally giving me a chance. Derek's mom handed me a flashlight and said I could climb up to check the attic. I tried to act casual, but my heart was pounding. I kept thinking, what if it's really up there? What if this is it? I climbed the ladder, not knowing that I was stepping into the perfect setup for revenge I never could have planned. The attic was exactly what you'd expect. Hot, dusty, cramped, and full of boxes that probably hadn't been touched in a decade. I pulled down 3 or 4 and carefully lowered them to the floor below, trying not to look too eager. Derek's mom seemed genuinely happy to be rid of the clutter, completely unaware of the gold mine she'd just handed me. The first box was disappointing. Tangled Christmas lights, a few ornaments, and a broken snow globe. I was starting to wonder if I'd gotten my hopes up for nothing. Then she opened the second box, and I almost forgot how to breathe. Inside was a pile of Pokemon games. Not loose cartridges, not scratched-up throwaways, but full-boxed copies. Every generation, every region. Red, blue, yellow, gold, silver, crystal, ruby, sapphire, emerald, black and white, diamond and pearl, all lined up like museum pieces, mint condition. My mind flashed back to that one time I'd gone to Derek's house during middle school. He had shown off his collection like it was sacred. I had reached out to touch one and he yelled at me. Nobody was allowed to touch them, not even his closest friends. He treated those games like treasure, which, to be fair, they kind of were. And now, here they were, in my hands. But it didn't stop there. We opened the rest of the boxes, one by one, and each one was more unbelievable than the last. There were 24 binders full of Pokemon cards, holographics, full sets, Japanese exclusives. There were old Nintendo consoles in near-pristine shape, Game Boys, DSs, even a Wii and a GameCube. There was a massive box of Lego sets still. In their original boxes, many of them Star Wars-themed. When I saw Jango Fett, I nearly dropped the box. That set alone was worth hundreds. I kept my cool on the outside. Just a quiet, polite smile and a casual, "Oh, this is kind of neat." But inside I was screaming. This was it. This was the moment. I looked up and asked as calmly as I could, "How much would you want for all 5 of these boxes?" She tilted her head, thinking, "I don't really know. It's just old toys, right? How about $100 a box? Or $400 if you want all 5. I paused for just 1 second, enough not to seem too eager, then said, "Yeah, I'll take them all." And just like that, the deal was done. I could barely contain myself as I loaded the boxes into my dad's truck. 5 full boxes. Thousands of dollars in games, cards, consoles, and Legos, all for $400. I didn't even bother hitting more garage sales that day. I went straight home, shaking with adrenaline. I knew this stuff was valuable, but I also knew I didn't have the time or knowledge to sell it right. That's where my uncle came in. He's a hobbyist eBay reseller. The kind of guy who knows what a sealed Game Boy Advance copy of Leaf Green is worth without even checking. I told him the story. The whole thing. Derek, the texts, the $40, the attic. He laughed for 5 straight minutes, then said, "Let's do this." We went through everything, item by item, logging values, looking up market prices. It was hours of work, but it felt like uncovering treasure. Binder after binder of Pokemon cards revealed rare holographics, complete sets, promotional prints. Some were even graded and sleeved. When we finished cataloging it all, my uncle gave me the number, $40,000, $40,000. I couldn't believe it. I literally sat there in silence for a full minute. It wasn't all going to sell for that. Of course. Some items would go for less, a few might go for more, and fees and shipping would eat into the total. But it didn't matter. That number, 40,000, meant everything to me. Because 10 years ago, Derek had taken $40 from me, on purpose, out of malice. And now, the universe had handed me 1,000 times that amount. My uncle got to work listing everything. He photographed each game from every angle, checked conditions, wrote detailed descriptions. He treated it like a full-time job. And honestly, it kind of was for a few months. The response was immediate. Collectors from all over the world were snapping up the best items: sealed Pokemon games, rare Japanese cards, mint-condition consoles. Some of the items went for way more than we expected, others for a little less, but it all balanced out in the end. By the time summer was over, my uncle had sold the majority of the lot. There were still a few stragglers, a couple Lego sets and low-tier cards, but the bulk was gone, and the money was real. And then came the moment I'd been dreaming about since middle school. He handed me a check. Even after his 10% cut, shipping, eBay fees, and taxes, the total was still life-changing. I used part of it to pay off my remaining student loans, in full. No more interest, no more monthly payments. And the rest? I used it as a down payment on a new car before I moved for my new job. I wasn't just free of Derek's memory. I was starting the next chapter of my life with a clean slate and a story I would never stop telling. Because this wasn't just revenge. This was perfectly poetic revenge. Looking back, I think the best part is that Derek has no idea. For all I know, he's out there somewhere still talking about his mint-condition Pokemon collection, not realizing his mom practically gave it away to the one person he absolutely didn't deserve to be generous to. He might never find out that the $40 he stole from me in middle school turned into tens of thousands of dollars in my pocket. And that's the beauty of it. I didn't have to scream or get even in some dramatic over-the-top way. I didn't confront him. I didn't post about it online for him to see. I didn't send a single message. Instead, I walked into his childhood home, smiled politely at his mom, and walked out with everything he once loved. Legally, peacefully, and with her blessing. It wasn't petty. It wasn't malicious. It was cosmic justice served cold. And while I'd never wish harm on anyone, I do hope that someday he opens a box expecting to find his old Pokemon cards and realizes they're long gone. Because in the end, Derek didn't just lose $40,000 worth of collectibles. He lost the one thing he always cared about most: control. And I gained something so much better: closure, victory, and the most satisfying ending I never saw coming. And now, on to the next story. She tried to fire me after I nearly died. I destroyed her career instead. I've always been the type to avoid conflict. A people pleaser to a fault. That's what my therapist called it. For over a decade, I've worked in marketing. I've had good bosses, mediocre ones, and a few I still have nightmares about. But there was one who stood above the rest, not because she was brilliant or visionary, but because she was, without exaggeration, the worst boss I've ever had. Let's call her Pamela. She was in her 40s, and by the time she joined the company, I'd already been there for years. She was brought in as the new VP of Marketing and Sales for our mid-size retail brand. The gossip was that she was the fourth choice for the position, hired not for her qualifications but to calm nervous shareholders. From day one, she gave off a vibe like she'd walked in straight from a 2003 corporate parody. At first, I tried to give her the benefit of the doubt. Maybe she was just settling in, but then days turned into weeks, and her routine became clear. She'd roll in after 10 a.m. like she owned the place, spend hours on long business lunches, and pour the rest of her energy into planning ridiculous company parties. Meanwhile, a manager under her, was doing the actual work of 2 or 3 people, and I'm not exaggerating when I say that. I was responsible for ensuring every store and the website were merchandised properly, all sales materials were delivered monthly, advertising was running, the departmental budget was set and managed, reporting was created, projects were PM'd, presentations and creative briefs prepared, and so much more. On top of that, I had access to Pamela's email and frequently sent messages on her behalf just to keep things from falling apart. Essentially, I was running her entire department while she took credit and schmoozed. I was burning out fast, but I kept telling myself that if I worked hard enough, maybe someone would notice. Maybe she'd step up. Maybe it would get better. Spoiler alert, it didn't. Pamela had this bizarre obsession with parties, quarterly luncheons, themed celebrations, random appreciation days. She spent obscene amounts of our budget on them. I repeatedly raised concerns about the costs, especially because we didn't even have the budget for most of it. But her solution? Take it out of next month's budget. We'll catch up later. Every month, I had to submit a revised budget, one edited under her explicit instruction to make it look like her overspending was totally under control. It was shady. I knew it, but I didn't know how to push back without jeopardizing my job. So I kept going, head down, always exhausted. 12-hour days were my normal. I'd work in the office until evening, then jump back online once my kid went to bed. Weekends weren't breaks. They were just quieter times to catch up on the never-ending backlog. I didn't realize it at the time, but my body was screaming for help. It wasn't just the workload that wore me down. It was the slow, suffocating realization that Pamela was reckless with everything she touched. She didn't just overspend, she weaponized the budget. She'd cook the numbers, justify things that made no sense, and then toss it all at me to make it look right. I was essentially laundering her incompetence to make the department seem functional. I remember sitting at my desk, staring at spreadsheets until my eyes blurred, trying to reconcile a party she threw for the sales team, complete with custom decor, branded cupcakes, and a live jazz trio, with a line item marked Team Training Session. It was so transparent it hurt. I pushed back more than once, reminding her that accounting might notice. She waved it off with the same smug line every time. They won't. Just adjust it. You're good at that. What choice did I have? I had bills to pay, a family to care for. I told myself I was doing what I had to. But every new month came with a new lie. A budget built on shaky edits and backdated invoices. And with each one, my name was the one signing off, not hers. Things got worse during the holiday season. For retailers like us, Q4 was everything. The make-or-break quarter. The time when our promotions and visuals had to be razor-sharp. But Pamela? She treated it like an improv comedy show. She kept scrapping approved visuals and demanding new ones, usually based on trends she saw on Pinterest or from her PR friend. She fired the agency we'd worked with for years and brought in some boutique firm she just adored, which turned out to be run by her college roommate. Then she did the same with our advertising agency. Every vendor she hired was a personal friend or someone she met at some lavish brunch. Meanwhile, she ignored our actual merchandise team, the ones who'd spent months planning sales strategies and forecasts. She tossed out their timelines and replaced them with her own. Rushed, inconsistent, and frankly dumb. We missed multiple key dates. Marketing materials were misaligned with inventory. It was a train wreck, and the numbers proved it. Our holiday sales tanked. Hard. While that was happening, I was getting sicker. I didn't know it yet, but I was developing a serious infection. At first, I brushed it off as stress. Headaches, fatigue, fever, nausea. Just another part of the job. I pushed through, like I always did, until my husband forced me to the hospital, and they admitted me almost immediately. Sepsis, a full-body infection that, if left untreated, could have killed me. The doctor's words were chilling. "You're lucky you got here when you did." He asked me about my lifestyle. I told him I worked in marketing. He gave me a look that said he'd seen this before. Stress, overwork, neglecting symptoms. It wasn't just bad luck. It was my job that had done this to me. The days that followed were a blur of IVs, tests, and whispered conversations with my husband about boundaries and balance. I was supposed to be resting, but my mind couldn't turn off. What was happening at work? Who was picking up the pieces? Was everything falling apart? Then one day, against my better judgment, I picked up my phone and logged into the company system. I still had access to Pamela's email. Just a quick peek, I told myself. What I found nearly made me rip out my IV. The first thing I saw was a flower delivery confirmation. A bouquet had been sent to my hospital room from the company. At first, I smiled. It was a sweet gesture. But then I looked closer. The sender, Pamela, and the flowers? Not my favorite, hers. A self-congratulatory gift disguised as compassion. I wasn't surprised, but I was still disappointed. I clicked into her inbox, intending to move the receipt into the appropriate folder for accounting. That's when I noticed several subject lines that weren't work-related. Curious, I opened them, and my blood pressure spiked. There was a thread between Pamela and several of her personal friends she had recently brought on as consultants, where she complained that I was milking my illness. She griped that I wasn't pushing through like a team player should. One line in particular hit me like a punch to the chest. She's got sepsis, not cancer. I don't know why she can't just get back to work, but it got worse. Another email thread showed Pamela talking to a former colleague, someone from a past job who clearly knew her management style. She was panicking about our tanking holiday sales. Her friend asked, "Isn't there someone under you who handles most of the day-to-day?" Pamela responded, "Yes, my name does pretty much everything." Her friend, clearly more experienced, In corporate politics, laid out a plan. If Pamela couldn't fire me outright because of my medical leave, which could be seen as retaliation, she could still get rid of me if she could pin something serious on me. Fraud, mismanagement, or theft. Something she could claim was discovered during my absence. I stared at the screen, stunned. She was plotting to fire me, not because I did anything wrong, but because I was in her way, because she was incompetent, because she needed someone to blame for her failure, and that someone was me. I sat in that hospital bed, IV dripping, heart racing. I realized I had spent years breaking my back for a boss who saw me as nothing more than a scapegoat, a disposable pawn. The worst part? She wasn't even smart enough to hide it. She'd left a trail of evidence, all in her inbox. I should have been resting, recovering, but something in me snapped that day. The people-pleaser cracked, and something else took its place. By the time I was cleared to return to work, I wasn't the same. I still needed my job, still had a mortgage and a family to support, but I had something else now, too. Leverage. My first day back felt like walking into enemy territory. Pamela greeted me with a forced smile and that patronizing tone she reserved for people she was pretending to support. "I've been so worried about you," she said, like she hadn't just spent the last few weeks plotting my downfall. "You've been handling too much. I think we need to take a few things off your plate." I nodded slowly, not trusting myself to speak. Then she laid out her plan, or rather, her trap. From that day forward, I was no longer to handle the department budget. I was to drop a specific stack of invoices at accounting and nothing more. I was not to speak to anyone in accounting about any financial matters, and if I had any concerns, any at all, I was to bring them to her, not HR. It was like watching a villain recite their monologue, thinking they were being clever. She believed she was cutting off my access, my voice, my power, but she was too late. What Pamela didn't know was that I had already built quiet alliances. One of them was with Lois, our senior accountant, a no-nonsense woman in her 50s who had worked for the company longer than either of us. Lois had always looked out for me in her own way, dropping little hints and pieces of advice when she thought I was burning out. Before my medical leave, she'd told me something that suddenly echoed in my mind. "If you ever need help, I'm your girl." Now I needed help. When Pamela handed me that stack of invoices, I took them without a word. But I didn't just carry the papers. I also brought everything I had collected, the evidence I had quietly saved before my medical leave, and what I'd gathered while recovering. First was a printout of the emails Pamela had sent while I was in the hospital, the ones mocking my illness, admitting she didn't know where any of the departmental files were, and conspiring with a friend to use me as a scapegoat. Second was a hard copy of our most recent unedited monthly budget, the real one, untouched by Pamela's pen. That alone would have shown the difference between what we submitted and what she wanted it to look like. But the real gems were the older documents, previous month's budgets with Pamela's handwriting all over them, instructing me to fudge numbers, reallocate funds, and balance things in ways that were clearly unethical, if not outright illegal. And then, the cherry on top, a printed email from our very first adjustment conversation, where Pamela not so subtly warned me that she could find someone else to handle the budget if I couldn't figure it out. I slid the invoices and the folder into my bag and made my way to accounting. As fate would have it, Lois was there, just outside her office. We made eye contact. She smiled. Polite, professional. "Hey, back already? That's good news. I'm just dropping these off," I said casually, holding up the invoices. Then I lowered my voice and added, "Pamela says you're only supposed to speak to her about anything budget-related." Lois paused, her smile fading into something sharper. Her eyes flicked to the thick file I was holding. I set it on her desk and gave her a look that said everything without saying a word. She didn't ask questions. She didn't need to. She just gave me a firm nod and gently kicked me out of her office with a smile. I went back to my desk like nothing had happened, logged into my email, scheduled a few meetings, smiled at people in the hallway, pretended that I wasn't waiting for the corporate bomb to drop. It didn't take long. By the end of the week, Pamela was gone. No tearful farewell, no forced, "we wish her well in her future endeavors" email from upper management. Just a sudden, quiet vacuum where her office used to be. One day she was sitting there micromanaging party decorations, and the next, she was erased from the building like she'd never existed. Word spread fast, of course. Office gossip is faster than any formal announcement. People whispered in, break rooms, over coffee machines, in private Slack messages. "Did you hear? Did she resign? Did they fire her?" No one knew the full story. But I did, and Lois probably did too. The official line, when I was finally called into a meeting with the CEO and HR, was that there had been inconsistencies in financial reporting and management concerns that warranted immediate termination. But what truly caught me off guard was what came next. The CEO, a man I'd only interacted with briefly before, looked me in the eye and said, "We owe you an apology. What you went through shouldn't have happened. We're grateful for everything you've done here, and we want to make that clear." Then he gave me something I didn't expect. A paid, 1-week vacation. No work calls, no strings attached. Just a full week to breathe, rest, and recover. For real this time. Almost cried right there in the room, but I didn't. I smiled, thanked them, and took the vacation. I went somewhere quiet with my family, turned off my phone, and for the first time in years, let myself feel the weight of everything I'd been carrying, and the relief of having finally dropped it. Still, I didn't stay at the company forever. There were other issues, systemic ones, bigger than Pamela, and after about a year, I left on my own terms. But this time I didn't leave with shame or stress or exhaustion. I left with my head high, my spine straighter, and the knowledge that I had stood up for myself in the end. That would have been the perfect ending. But fate wasn't done with me just yet. Fast forward to now. Over 5 years later, I've rebuilt my career, piece by piece. I'm once again a manager in sales and marketing, but this time, it's different. I work under a boss named Mike. Early 40s, sharp, fair, and actually knows how to lead. He trusts my decisions, supports me publicly, and lets me run my department without breathing down my neck. It's not just refreshing, it's healing. Recently, Mike tasked me with hiring new staff to build out my own team. For the first time in my career, I was going to pick who I wanted to lead, train, and grow alongside me. I was excited. I opened up the applicant portal and began browsing resumes. That's when I saw it. Her name. At first, I thought it had to be someone else. Just a coincidence. But as I scanned the resume, the details confirmed it. Pamela. Same last name, same career timeline, same string of roles after our company. Shorter and shorter with each new position. She had clearly fallen down the corporate ladder. The title of VP at our former company was still the highest rank she ever held. Everything after that read like a desperate attempt to cling to relevance. Contractor roles, brief consulting gigs, a series of director-level jobs that didn't seem to last more than a few months. But what truly made my jaw tighten was the boldness of her lies. She claimed sole credit for driving 87% sales growth during the holiday season, the same season that nearly ended my career and put me in the hospital. She listed major projects that I had built from scratch, campaigns that I had pitched, executed, and optimized, all under her name. Reading her resume felt like watching a burglar show off the jewels they stole from your house. I could have interviewed her. I could have set up a face-to-face meeting, just to watch her squirm, just to see the moment she recognized me, and realized whose desk her resume had landed on. But I didn't. I thought about Mike, about the trust he placed in me, about the kind of leader I wanted to be. Petty satisfaction wasn't worth risking that. So instead, I did the one thing that felt more powerful than confrontation. I clicked disqualified. One simple silent motion. No drama, no confrontation. Just justice. Pamela would never know how close she came, how perfectly the universe had aligned for her to land right back in front of the person she tried to destroy, and how that person, the one she mocked, the one she lied about, the one she tried to fire while they were fighting for their life, now had the final say. I thought about sending a personal rejection letter, one that gently reminded her that the past has a way of catching up. But honestly, clicking that button was enough. Sometimes the most satisfying revenge is no revenge at all. Just quietly watching someone face the consequences of their own choices, and letting them wonder how close they came to getting what they wanted before I took it away with a single click. And now, on to the next story. My client screwed up badly, then tried to ruin my career. I was just shy of 40, with over a decade of legal battles behind me and enough war stories to fill a bar stool. If there was one lesson that stuck harder than anything law school ever taught me, it came from an old-school lawyer I interned. For during my second summer, he wasn't flashy. No three-piece suits, no rooftop lunches, but he was sharp, razor sharp. One day, over burnt coffee in his cluttered office, he looked at me and said, "A lawyer has 3 duties. First, to himself. Second, to the court. Last, the client. Never forget the order." I laughed at first, thought it was cynical. But he leaned in, eyes dead serious. "Clients will fuck you," he said. "They'll throw you under the bus the second things go south. So always cover your ass first." Back then, I brushed it off. Young, idealistic, eager to prove myself in the downtown towers with their polished boardrooms and designer litigation. I thought I knew better. Turns out, I didn't. But I did remember that conversation. And many years later, when one client tried to pull me under the wheels of a bus, he drove off a cliff, I remembered every single word, and I was ready. Frank was nearly 60, a salaryman relic from another era, the kind of guy who thought facts, machines were still cutting edge, and that lawyers were optional. He worked for a mid-sized company, nothing flashy, but they owned some decent real estate scattered here and there. One day, one of their buildings burned to the ground. Millions in property damage, a golden ticket of an insurance claim, and they gave it to Frank. Not their general counsel, not an actual risk manager. Frank. Why? Because he'd been around forever and thought he knew what he was doing. Plus, he hated spending money, especially on lawyers. "Don't worry," he told me when the topic came up, almost like I was offering to mop his floor for a fee. "I've got it covered. No need to get legal involved. That building was ash." And Frank was smiling like he had a bucket of water. The only reason I even knew about the fire was because he let it slip in passing. I practically had to wrestle the details out of him afterward, and every step was a battle. He didn't want help, didn't want to pay, didn't think he needed me. And I've seen this pattern before. Insurers stringing you along, asking for document after document, pretending they're still reviewing. It's a game, and the goal is to stall until the clock runs out. "The insurer is going to screw you, Frank," I said. "They're running out the limitation period." Frank waved me off. "You don't know that." Actually, I did. That's literally my job. But Frank was in too deep with his own ego, and the adjuster he was apparently best buddies with didn't want to listen. But I didn't stop warning him, because I knew what was coming. The limitation period was 2 weeks away. 2 weeks. That's how long Frank had left to file a lawsuit before the insurer could legally slam the door in his face and pretend the claim never existed. I was sounding the alarm with every tool I had. Calls, emails, warnings in bold red text. "Frank, you need to sue now. The moment that deadline passes, they'll ghost you. They'll stop replying, stop taking your calls. You'll get a final email that says, 'Sorry, you're out of time.' That's it. Game over." But Frank? He was still acting like he had it under control. "I get along great with the adjuster," he told me, as if insurance adjusters were loyal friends instead of corporate firewall ninjas trained to dodge payouts. "You won't even be able to reach me next week," I told him. "I'll be in trial. This is your last chance. If you don't let me sue, at least hire someone. Anyone. Just get it filed." He mumbled something about looking into it. I followed up with another email, and another right before I went into trial. I even spelled it out crystal clear. "This is your deadline. I will be unavailable. If you don't act, this claim dies." Then I shut my laptop, walked into court, and tried to forget about the walking disaster named Frank. Weeks went by. No emails, no calls. I assumed, wrongly, that maybe, just maybe, he'd handled it. That he'd gotten another firm. That he hadn't completely ignored every red flag I'd waved in front of him like a crazed matador. Then my phone rang, and it was Frank. "Remember that fire insurance thing we talked about?" Frank said casually, like we'd discussed the weather. "Not a multi-million-dollar ticking time bomb?" I thought maybe he was calling to gloat. Maybe he got lucky. Maybe the insurer paid out despite everything. "So they paid?" I asked. "That's great, Frank. You were right." Silence. Then, "What are you talking about?" He sounded confused, nervous. "I mean," he continued, "can I get a copy of the claim?" "What claim?" "You know, the lawsuit, the one against the insurer." I leaned back in my chair. "Wait, are you saying they didn't pay?" Click. He hung up on me. 30 seconds later, my email dinged. There it was, a classic CYA email from Frank, written as if we hadn't had a dozen conversations about the deadline. Just a friendly little message, saying he had told me to sue, that he was following up because he was worried when he didn't receive a copy of the claim, like I had just forgotten to file it, like I had dropped the ball. I stared at the screen. He was actually trying to pin this on me. After everything, after ignoring every warning, after brushing me off for weeks, Frank was about to lose the company millions, and now he wanted me to take the fall for it. But what he didn't know was I had already pulled the trigger. Here's the thing about law. You don't sue someone without client authorization. Ever. It's not just a bad idea. It's a career-ending, get-sued-yourself kind of move. You could be on the hook for the other side's legal fees. Your client could disown you, and your firm could throw you out faster than you can say malpractice. But I knew Frank was going to screw this up. I knew it in my bones. So weeks earlier, quietly, cautiously, I filed a bare-bones lawsuit against the insurer. I didn't tell Frank. I didn't even tell the company. I just made him send me the proof of loss form, which gave me just enough to create a basic statement of claim. It wasn't pretty, short on facts, missing polish, but it was enough to, preserve the case. I rolled the dice, risked my own neck, because I believed in protecting myself, and ironically protecting the client from themselves. Now, with Frank trying to rewrite history and make me the fall guy, I hit reply on his email. I CC'd not just Frank, but his boss, and most importantly, the company's in-house counsel, Bill. I wrote one line. I take it the insurer didn't pay you, just like I told you they wouldn't. And now that the limitation period has passed, they've told you to get lost. Is that it? Within hours, Bill replied, and then called me directly. Frank messed up, he said. We know. His story doesn't add up. Apparently, Frank had been summoned to a boardroom interrogation. But when the execs compared his version of events to my emails sent before the deadline, warning him over and over, his lies unraveled fast. So that's it? Bill asked. We just lost millions? No, I said, pulling up the file. I sued. Bill froze. You sued? Without instructions? Yep, I said. Then I emailed him the filed claim. There was silence on the line. Then, finally, thank God. Can I leave it with you? You already did, I said. A few days later, I got a call from someone new. A guy I'd never dealt with before who worked for the client. Polite, a little hesitant. We've got a situation, he said. I usually deal with Frank, I replied, keeping my voice neutral. Where's he? What he told me was better than any courtroom victory. Frank had been called into another meeting. This time with no coffee, no pleasantries, no excuses. Just a one-page letter waiting for him on the conference table. Termination. Immediate. He packed his things in a box while security stood by. Walked the walk of shame past his co-workers. Escorted down to the parking lot like a disgraced executive. In a bad TV show. Gone. And frankly, he had no one to blame but himself. He'd ignored every warning. Tried to handle a 7-figure claim with zero legal help. Blew the deadline. Tried to rewrite history and pin it on me, but I'd already protected the company, and myself. The company didn't just recover the money, they recovered their trust in me. The new guy who replaced Frank? A dream client. Smart, respectful, and, most importantly, never tried to nickel and dime me. I didn't set out to ruin Frank's life. I didn't need revenge, but sometimes justice doesn't need planning. It just needs the truth to come out. I tell this story to young lawyers sometimes. Usually over drinks, usually after they've had their first run-in with a slippery client, who made them doubt themselves. They always ask the same thing. What happened to Frank? I tell them the truth. He was just an anecdote, a cautionary tale, a walking example of why you always protect yourself first. Because even a well-meaning client can turn on you the second they feel the heat. Do I feel bad for him? A little. He was close to retirement. Probably won't land anything better than contract work after that. He lost more than just his job. He lost his reputation, maybe even his confidence. It was a life-altering moment for him. But here's the thing. He tried to ruin my career to save himself. He sent that email knowing it wasn't true. He tried to rewrite reality to cover his mistake, and that's why I don't lose sleep over it. Because the truth was already on paper, in my emails, in the lawsuit I filed when no one else was paying attention. I didn't sabotage him. I didn't retaliate. I just did my job. And let the fallout land where it was deserved. And that's the real lesson. Clients come and go, but your name, your integrity, that stays. And now, on to the next story. The memo that destroyed a career. When I first joined the firm, I thought I had finally made it. All those years of studying, the sleepless nights prepping for exams, and the crushing pressure of law school, all of it felt worth it when I stepped through the gleaming glass doors of one of the top downtown law firms in the city. Everything smelled like expensive leather and fresh ambition. You could feel the hunger in the air. Every associate looked like they were gunning for partner, and I was ready to prove myself, or at least I thought I was. They assigned me to work under a guy named Mark. 3 years into his legal career, he was technically still a junior, but just senior enough to have someone like me, fresh out of law, school, reporting to him. The idea was that I'd learn the ropes from him, that he'd show me how to be a real litigator. Instead, what I got was an inside look at how the legal system rewards presentation over substance. Mark was the firm's golden boy, or at least that's how he styled himself. He dressed like a CEO. Every morning he walked in with a pair of hand-shined Oxfords that probably cost more than my rent. His suits were bespoke, sharp shoulders, perfect fit, always dark navy or charcoal, with some flashy lining he'd let show when he unbuttoned his jacket. He wore cologne that screamed luxury and always had some kind of gold on him, tie clip, watch, cufflinks, even his pen. The man oozed confidence. If you didn't look too closely, you'd think he had it all figured out. But once you worked with him, the cracks showed. Fast. Mark had a problem. Several, actually. First, he didn't know the law, not just the usual green around the edges. Kind of ignorance. I mean fundamental misunderstandings. He misquoted statutes. He cited case law that didn't support his arguments. Half the time, he relied on me to explain the actual legal framework behind whatever issue we were tackling. Second, his writing was abysmal. For a litigator, that's a death sentence. His memos read like high school essays. Vague, repetitive, and full of empty jargon meant to sound impressive. He confused precedent with president once in a draft. I wish I was joking. And third, he was a coward, a litigator who hated court. I'll never forget the first time I went to assignment court with him. It's supposed to be the easiest thing in the world. No arguing, no jury, no drama. You just show up, set trial dates, and go. But when our turn came, I watched his hands tremble as he stood up. His voice cracked. His notes were a mess. He could barely get the words out. He was terrified, and this was the man I was supposed to learn from, but that wasn't the worst of it. Not by a long shot. Mark had a habit, one I didn't recognize until I was already neck deep. He stole credit. Quietly, efficiently, repeatedly. I'd spend hours, sometimes days, drafting legal opinions, building out arguments, double-checking case law, formatting citations. I'd email the drafts to him, assuming he'd review and pass them along to the partner. And every time, like clockwork, the same thing happened. My name disappeared. Worse, my docketed hours vanished. One by one, line by line, my entries for research, drafting, and revision would be erased from the system. In their place, Mark would submit identical time entries under his name, my work, my effort, his recognition. At first, I assumed it was a fluke, maybe a system error. Maybe he forgot to include me, but it kept happening. And the more it did, the more I realized it wasn't a mistake. It was strategy. The partners began pulling me into meetings, not to praise my work, but to question my productivity. "You're falling short on billables," one said. "Other juniors are logging more." I tried to explain, but there was no evidence. My entries were gone. My name wasn't on anything. I looked like dead weight. So I took my concerns to the partner overseeing our team, a man with graying temples and the demeanor of someone permanently unimpressed. I laid it all out. I explained what I'd written, how it had vanished, how it reappeared under Mark's name. The partner barely looked up from his paperwork. "You'll just have to work harder," he said. Then he paused and added without a hint of irony, or smarter, smarter. It echoed in my head for days. Smarter than what? Smarter than getting robbed blind? Smarter than asking for help? I went back to my cubicle, small, cold, and crammed between two walls like a punishment cell, and stared at my screen. I hadn't joined this firm to be invisible. I hadn't survived law school to be the ghostwriter for a man who couldn't even handle assignment court without shaking. Mark had been screwing me over for months, smiling to my face while stabbing me in the back. He thought I was just another disposable junior, someone who would burn out or quit before anyone noticed. But he didn't know me. He didn't know what I was capable of, and he was about to find out. Things didn't improve after I confronted the partner. If anything, they got worse. Mark seemed to know I'd tried to go over his head, and he doubled down. He became colder, sharper. Every interaction felt like a test. He started nitpicking everything I submitted. I'd hand in a well-researched memo, and he'd skim it with a frown and mutter, "This isn't what I asked for." I once asked him to clarify what was wrong, and he just waved me off. Figure it out. But I had figured it out. He didn't want me to fix anything. He wanted me to fail, because it made stealing from me easier. If he discredited my work to my face, then quietly removed it from the system and submitted it himself, no one would question it. After all, he had fixed my terrible draft. It was a simple game, nasty, effective, and I was losing. Every month, our firm had a strict billable quota for junior associates. If you didn't hit it, you got flagged. If you got flagged more than once, they started having conversations about your future. I'd been skating the edge ever since Mark started gutting my docket entries, and I could feel the noose tightening. There were whispers now. Some associates looked at me like I was already dead weight. Others avoided eye contact altogether. That was how it worked here. When someone started to sink, no one offered a hand. They just moved away to avoid the splash. I started staying later, coming in earlier, working weekends like it was nothing. But no matter how much I pushed, I couldn't keep up with the hours Mark kept erasing from under me. My name was barely attached to anything. If you looked at my official output, it was as if I didn't exist. I was exhausted, humiliated. And then came the final straw. Mark assigned me a memo, a legal opinion on a relatively minor issue in a case we were handling. It wasn't complicated, but it required some finesse. I took it seriously, like I always did. Spent the better part of 3 days drafting it. Double-checked every reference, used precise language, structured the argument cleanly, formatted it like a partner would expect. When I handed it to Mark, he didn't even read the first page. He scanned it for 2 seconds, scoffed, and said, "This opinion is shit." My jaw actually clenched. "What's wrong with what I wrote?" I asked, holding on to my composure by a thread. "Not what I asked for," he replied flatly, already turning away. But I still had the original assignment, the email he sent 2 weeks prior. I pulled it up. Word for word, I had answered exactly what he requested. I hadn't misunderstood anything. I had delivered exactly what he asked, and he was pretending otherwise. Why? Because he was going to delete the hours, claim the memo as his own, and probably tweak a few sentences so it looked like he'd fixed my errors. Then he'd slide it onto a partner's desk with his name on top and a smirk on his face. I sat there in my cubicle, staring at my monitor, hands shaking. Not from fear, but from something colder, deeper. I wasn't angry. I was done. This wasn't just about office politics anymore. It wasn't about a difficult boss or unfair treatment. This was theft, over and over, open, intentional theft, and no one cared. The people who could stop it were complicit through apathy, and the man doing it strutted around like he was untouchable, but he wasn't. That night, I stayed late. Not to work on Mark's latest assignment, but to plan. I pulled out a notebook. Not for notes, not for legal research. This was for revenge. Cold, methodical, surgical revenge. I flipped back through my old files, digging up everything I knew about Mark. His habits, his tells, his patterns. I even pulled up old emails from the partner he reported to, a man notorious for avoiding email entirely. He was old school, preferred hard copies, and hated anything digital. I'd once watched him scoff at a PDF like it had personally insulted him, and that gave me an idea. Christmas was just around the corner. Most of the firm would be on holiday soon. The office would be half empty. Quiet. Ideal for what I was about to do. I was going to give Mark a gift, one that he would never forget. The plan took shape almost immediately, not because I was some genius strategist, but because Mark had made it so easy. He operated on a predictable loop: steal, deny, delete, and smile. That was his entire playbook. But like all creatures of habit, he had blind spots, and I knew just where to hit. The key was the partner he reported to. Let's call him Mr. Callahan. Callahan was ancient, at least by firm standards. Gray suit, white hair, coffee breath, no-nonsense attitude, but more importantly, he hated email, detested it. He'd dictate memos to his assistant or scrawl notes in pencil. I'd once seen him physically tape a post-it to a monitor to make a point. That meant if a printed memo landed on someone's desk with his letterhead and wording, no one would question it, including Mark. And that's what I was counting on. So, I got to work. First, I pulled up every memo I'd ever received that originated from Callahan's office. I studied the formatting, where the date went, how he addressed the recipient, what font his assistant used when typing for him. He liked serif fonts, bolded subject lines, and triple spacing between paragraphs. He always ended with "Governor, yourself accordingly." I recreated the format meticulously, then came the wording. That had to be perfect. Callahan wrote in dry, clipped tones like every word cost him money. I mimicked his style. No contractions, no emotion, just precision. The body of the memo contained a fabricated legal assignment, something that sounded urgent, obscure, and high-level, but was functionally meaningless. I made it about admiralty law, a topic so rare and arcane that almost no one at our firm had touched it in years. I layered it with constitutional jargon, just enough to make it sound important. Please prepare an analysis of the interplay between Admiralty jurisdiction and federal legislative authority with respect to post-Confederation. Evolution in common law maritime claims, which is a fancy way of saying, here's a black hole, go jump in it. Finally, I signed it off with Callahan's name, just his initials and last name the way he always did it. Then I printed the memo using the same type of paper from the office supply closet, the heavier stock Callahan liked. I aged it slightly. By folding and unfolding it, gave it a few natural creases, and slipped it into Mark's inbox late on the night of December 23rd. Timing mattered. I waited until Callahan had officially left for the holidays. He was old-fashioned that way, too. Took the same 2 weeks off every year, no exceptions. Once he was gone, there was no chance of Mark verifying the memo with him. He'd assume it was real because Callahan only ever communicated with hard copies. A memo appearing on his desk like that? Totally normal. But the best part was this. I knew exactly how Mark would respond. I watched it play out the next morning like a scripted scene. Mark walked in late, as usual, coffee in hand, humming something smug under his breath. He spotted the memo in his inbox and froze. I saw his eyebrows raise. His fingers tapped the edge of the paper as he read. Then, just like I expected, he panicked. He marched straight to the cubicles and tossed the memo on my desk. "You've got a new assignment," he said. "Straight from Callahan. Big one." I picked it up and read it like it was the first time I'd seen it. I widened my eyes. "Admiralty law?" I said, doing my best impression of overwhelmed junior. "This is a huge assignment. I mean, I'm going away for the holidays. Can someone else handle it? Is this really urgent?" He shook his head, too caught up in his own panic to think. "Can't do that. It's urgent. Just let HR know. Maybe you'll get time and a half or something." Then he turned on his heel and walked away like he'd just delegated a crisis. He never questioned it, never called Callahan's assistant, never asked why this massive assignment had landed out of nowhere. Because Mark wanted to believe it was real. Because if it was real, then he could once again pass the burden on to me, steal the credit later, and look like a hero. And just like that, the trap was set. The beauty of the plan was that Mark never realized he wasn't in control. He thought he was playing his usual game, dump the work on me, steal it later, and bask in the praise. What he didn't know was that this time, every move he made was exactly what I wanted him to do. By noon that day, he'd already taken the forged memo and retyped it. His version was nearly identical, except for one crucial detail. The sender had changed. Instead of "from GM Callahan," it now read "from Mark Ellison." And instead of assigning the task to him, the assignment now originated from him. I watched it appear in the firm's internal tasking system, logged under his name, marked as urgent. Just like that, he'd made it official. That moment sealed his fate. Now, any time I spent on the memo would be fully traceable to him. Every hour I logged, every email I sent, every word I typed would be tied directly to his request. He couldn't back out later and say it wasn't his doing, not without admitting to altering a partner's directive, which was a fireable offense. Of course, I didn't plan to spend 100 hours working over the holidays because I'd already written the memo, or at least most of it, back in law. School, I'd taken an upper-year course that focused on obscure legal frameworks, including maritime and admiralty law. It had been brutal, dense, and mostly irrelevant to anything I thought I'd do in practice. But I'd written a final paper for it, and like every neurotic law student, I'd saved every version of that paper to a floppy disk that still sat in a drawer beside my bed. So while Mark thought he'd crushed my holiday plans, I was quietly booting up an old laptop to dig through archived drafts. It took me about an hour to find the file, another hour to clean it up and modernize the formatting. I added a few references, dressed up the conclusion, and inserted footnotes in the house style used by our firm. It wasn't just good, it was overkill. I made it long, dense, and impressive looking to the untrained eye. Mark wouldn't even try to read it. He wouldn't dare. After that, I had time. Time to relax, see family, recharge. I stayed in town, couldn't afford to travel anyway, but I made it a point to stop by the office every couple of days. I'd sit at my desk, open a few case databases, and send an email or two referencing the assignment. Just enough activity to make it clear. I was hard at work. The rest of the time, I lived my life, ate real meals, slept more than 4 hours a night, watched terrible holiday TV, And every few days, I'd log more time on the fake memo. 3 hours here, 5 hours there. I even wrote myself notes about case law conflicts and jurisdictional ambiguity in my private work journal in case anyone ever asked for proof of how deep I had gone. By the time New Year's rolled around, I had clocked just over 100 billable hours on the assignment. Mark never asked how it was going. He assumed, as always, that I was breaking myself to make him look good, and I let him believe it. When the office reopened after the holidays, I printed the final memo that morning. It was thick, nearly 40 pages, and fresh off the printer, still warm. I handed it to Mark just as he walked in, gliding through the office in a pristine three-piece suit with a new gold watch on his wrist. He took the memo, felt its weight, and smiled. Didn't even thank me. Just turned and walked away, thinking he'd just scored another win. He had no idea what he was holding. To everyone else in the firm, I had just finished a grueling research marathon. Over 100 hours of high-level legal analysis logged during what was supposed to be my holiday. I played the part well, just tired enough, just quiet enough, just worn around the edges like someone who'd sacrificed rest for the greater good. The whispers started almost immediately. Did you hear about the junior who stayed in town over Christmas to finish a Callahan assignment? Apparently it was some monster of a research job. Constitutional law meets admiralty jurisdiction? You'd think a partner would give that to someone with more seniority. It didn't matter. That none of it was true. The perception alone made me seem competent, reliable, willing to put in the hours, even during the holidays. I knew how this firm worked. Reputation often outweighed results. And after being invisible for so long, I needed them to see me. Not Mark, me. But what I didn't expect was how quickly things escalated once the partners got involved. See, Mark had taken the completed memo and walked straight into a partner meeting scheduled for that day. Apparently, it was an informal post-holiday check-in. The kind where department heads went over ongoing files prepped for the quarter ahead and casually flexed on each other about their team's productivity. Mark must have thought he was about to impress them all. He presented the memo with confidence, maybe even a little swagger, called it a comprehensive jurisdictional deep dive, and probably used phrases like showing initiative and long-form analysis. He handed it directly to Callahan. That's when the trouble started. According to the gossip I heard later, Callahan didn't even look at the cover page. He flipped to the body, skimmed the first few paragraphs and paused. Then he looked again. Then he held it up, pinched between two fingers like it smelled bad, and asked, "Who wrote this?" Mark proudly raised his hand. "You asked me for an analysis of maritime jurisdiction, and I assigned the research to—" "I asked you for this?" Callahan interrupted. Now here's where context matters. Callahan didn't just dislike surprises, he loathed them. He was the kind of partner who once tore apart a fourth-year associate for printing double-sided without permission. His control over his caseload, his team, even his memos was absolute. So the idea that he'd assigned a junior lawyer to spend 100-plus hours on a deep-dive memo over the holidays without remembering it wasn't just improbable. It was offensive to him, and when he looked at the cover page again and saw Mark's name as the assigning lawyer, well, that's when he lost it. I was still in my cubicle when I heard the yell, a deep, furious voice echoing down the marble hallway, like thunder in a canyon. "Mark, get in here, now!" Chairs squeaked, doors creaked, phones stopped ringing. It was like the entire floor held its breath. I heard hurried footsteps, polished shoes scrambling across hardwood, and the muffled sounds of stammered excuses. Then a second voice, louder, sharper. "What the hell is this?" And finally, because fate has a sense of humor, a third voice called out, "You! Get in here too!" That was for me. When Callahan summoned me into his office, the hallway felt like a tunnel. Associates peered out of doorways like school kids watching a classmate get dragged to the principal's office. I walked slowly, calmly, memo folder still in my hand, trying to keep my heart rate under control. Callahan was standing by his desk, holding the memo with two fingers like it was some kind of biohazard. Mark stood opposite him, pale, blinking, visibly sweating. His gold tie pin was crooked. For once, his bespoke suit didn't make him look powerful. It made him look ridiculous. Like a kid playing dress-up in court. "You wrote this?" Callahan barked. I took the memo from him, skimmed it for effect, then nodded. Yes, I started over the holidays. The original assignment memo was left on Mark's desk just before Christmas. "You wrote this entire thing, this monstrosity, during the break?" I did, I said. It seemed urgent. I was told you needed it for a jurisdictional briefing. I logged a little over 100 hours. I held out a printed docket summary, which I had conveniently prepared ahead of time. He snatched it, scanned it, and let out a deep, disbelieving exhale. This is a prank, Callahan muttered. It has to be. Mark tried to jump in. Look, it's not that big a deal. I thought you... Not that big a... Mark, Callahan cut him off with the kind of tone that could sandpaper paint off walls. This is one of the most irrelevant, obscure, and useless assignments I have ever seen assigned to a junior at this firm. This is borderline sabotage, Mark stammered. I thought it was relevant to that shipping arbitration we talked about last quarter. Callahan blinked. What shipping arbitration? There wasn't one. Of course there wasn't one. He turned back to me. Show me the memo you received. I handed over the original forged document, the one I'd planted in Mark's inbox. Callahan took it, examined the formatting, read the language. I'd nailed the tone, the spacing, even the way his name was abbreviated. He frowned. Then something clicked in his expression. I didn't write this, he said flatly and looked at Mark. And if you did, you forged my signature. Mark's eyes widened in panic. No, I didn't. I just assumed, look, it was on my desk. You retyped it. You resent it. You made it yours. I thought it was from you, he cried. Callahan turned slowly, eyes narrowing. And you didn't think to confirm? You thought I'd assign a junior associate 100 hours of solo constitutional maritime crossover research on Christmas Eve? You thought that made sense? Mark had no answer. He just stood there looking smaller by the second. Callahan dropped the memo onto his desk like it was toxic. Then he turned to me again. You may go. I nodded, turned, and left the room with a steady walk. But inside, I was buzzing. It was done. The trap had closed, and the look on Mark's face would be burned into my memory forever. Later that day, the whispers returned. Did you hear Callahan screamed at Mark? I heard he might get written up. Maybe. Even flagged for ethics review. Apparently, he wasted 100 hours of a junior's time on a garbage assignment. Partners furious. The official line that came out later was that Mark had misunderstood the memo and mishandled the task. But behind the scenes, everyone knew the truth, or at least enough of it, and none of them blamed me. I was just the diligent junior, working hard over the break, following instructions. As far as anyone could tell, I'd been played. And so had Mark. Only one of us knew it wasn't a coincidence. Mark didn't get fired. That would have been too clean, too satisfying. Big firms rarely fire people outright, at least not without cause they can justify in paperwork and performance reviews. But what happened to Mark over the next few weeks was worse than being fired. He was quarantined. Suddenly, he wasn't being invited to partner briefings anymore. Memos stopped flowing through his desk. He wasn't copied on high-priority client emails, and his name disappeared from case schedules. He'd walk by groups of associates who used to look up to him, and now they looked right past him. The partners stopped greeting him in the hallway. The golden boy? Tarnished. What's more, Callahan made one thing explicitly clear to me in a closed-door meeting the following Monday. From now on, he said, any legal research you perform for Mr. Ellison should be emailed directly to me, not him. That was the real punishment. Mark no longer had access to my work, or any juniors for that matter. If he wanted research, he had to do it himself or go through Callahan. Either way, his ability to coast off others was gone, and something even more surprising happened later that week. An envelope arrived on my desk, hand-delivered by HR. Inside was a thank you card. Yes, a literal thank you card, and a belated holiday bonus check. It wasn't massive, but it was something, a gesture, enough to buy a few real meals and maybe even a weekend getaway, which I desperately needed. More importantly, it was proof. Proof that the firm had noticed my effort, whether they knew the full truth or not. From then on, I wasn't invisible anymore. I didn't suddenly skyrocket to partner track, but I had leverage, respect, protection. My docket entries were no longer deleted. My emails got responses. Other associates started asking for my input on tough assignments. I even got invited to drinks with the litigation team. First, Mark, meanwhile, kept shrinking into himself. He was still there, still showing up in his tailored suits and gold accessories. But the shine was gone. No one took him seriously anymore. He became a cautionary tale, how not to treat the people below you. And me, I kept going, quiet, steady, calculating. I never told anyone what really happened, never bragged, never hinted. That memo remained my secret weapon, my little piece of justice. Years later, when I left the firm for better opportunities, I packed up my cubicle, slid that old floppy disk into a drawer, and smiled. Every time things got rough, whenever a boss tried to push me too far, or a coworker tried to take credit for my grind, I'd think back to the case of the forged memo, the perfect con, the revenge that landed with surgical precision. He thought he could destroy my career. Instead, I wrote the memo that nearly destroyed his. And now, on to the next story. I destroyed his RuneScape world after he cheated on me. I met him in RuneScape when I was 17. He was 14. I still remember the exact moment we started talking. It was inside a crowded bank area in the game, where people were spamming trades and chatting nonsense. Somehow, in the middle of all that chaos, we noticed each other. It started with something small, a shared joke, a quick exchange. Then suddenly we were doing quests together, logging in at the same times, talking more, relying on each other. Before long, it was daily. That kind of connection felt unreal back then. It was effortless. We became inseparable, not just in the game, but in conversation too. We started chatting outside the game, using messaging apps, staying up until 2 or 3 in the morning. He would message me right when he woke up. I would send him screenshots from my day. We were just kids, but there was something real in it. It felt safe. He made me laugh more than anyone else ever had. There was a softness to him, a goofy kind of charm that drew me in. Even with the age gap and the distance between us, we felt close. Eventually, we crossed that line between friends and something more. One of us said it first. I can't remember who, but from that point on, it was a relationship. Long distance, yes, but real to both of us. Every few months, we would find a way to meet in person. Flights were expensive and schedules were complicated, but we made it work. Each visit felt like this magical pocket of time. We would talk about what it would be like to live in the same place permanently. The plan was always that I would move to him once I had enough stability with my job. Back then, I thought we were building something. Not just in RuneScape, where we created a shared account and trained skills together like it was our digital child, but in real life too. He would send me songs. I would send him care packages. We made promises, talked about the future, told each other that the distance was temporary, that one day we would fall asleep in the same bed and wake up without needing a phone call. But somewhere along the way, I started to grow. I got busier with work. I started taking on more responsibilities. My career began to matter more. My time was valuable in a new way. I didn't have the energy to spend hours in a video game every night, and I didn't need to. Life was happening outside the screen. He stayed exactly the same. He played RuneScape constantly, not just casually, but obsessively. It became his entire life. While I was working 8-hour shifts and juggling bills, he was grinding skills and hoarding gold in a virtual world. I told myself it was just a phase, that maybe he was trying to cope with something, but months passed, and nothing changed. He couldn't hold a job. Every opportunity slipped through his fingers. I started covering his rent when he moved out of his parents' place. I sent him money for food. I bought him in-game items, paid for his membership, even gifted him other games just to keep him happy. He always promised things would get better, but I was the only one putting in real-world effort. And still I stayed. I told myself love required sacrifice, that not everyone moved at the same pace, that he just needed more time. I thought maybe one day he would catch up. I was wrong. It all started to feel heavier around last November. My own expenses were piling up. I had car repairs that couldn't wait, bills that were already overdue, and some debts to the state that I was still trying to clear. For the first time in years, I had to tell him something I never imagined I would say. I couldn't afford to cover his rent. I expected him to be upset. I even rehearsed what I was going to say before calling him. But I didn't expect what actually happened. He panicked, like full meltdown mode. He started crying on the phone and saying he couldn't go back to his parents, that they would abuse him, that he'd have nowhere to go. I sat there on the line listening to him fall apart, trying to comfort him while my own stress was eating me alive. I reminded him that his parents weren't what he claimed. I had seen them interact with him plenty of times. They weren't monsters. They were patient, generous, and honestly, they had done more for him than he gave them credit for. I even offered to help him look for something temporary, just until I could catch up financially. I thought if I gave him options, he would take one, but he shot everything down. The conversation spiraled. He became passive-aggressive, accused. Me of letting him down. When I tried to explain my side, he barely listened. We ended the call on a tense, bitter note. Afterward, I sat on my bed and just stared at the wall. My heart was pounding in my chest. I felt guilty and exhausted at the same time, like I was the one failing him, even though I was the only one actually trying. Still, I didn't stop. I cared about him. So the next day, I reached out to his dad. I didn't want to embarrass him or start a fight. I just explained the situation honestly. I told him that his son might need to move back in for a little while and asked if he knew of any job openings nearby. Surprisingly, his dad was incredibly helpful. He mentioned that a friend needed seasonal help at a small warehouse. The job was simple: moving boxes, sweeping, keeping inventory, $15 an hour, flexible hours. It was practically made for someone like him. That night, I brought it up. I explained everything gently, even tried to sound excited about it. But before I could finish, he cut me off, said the job sounded beneath him, said he didn't want to work in some crappy warehouse just to earn a little money. He didn't want to work at all. He just wanted to stay home and play RuneScape. I was stunned. I reminded him about the other job listings I had sent, but he had already dismissed those. Then he said something that made my stomach twist. He told me maybe I should be working harder. Maybe I should get a second job, so that he didn't have to work at all. I didn't even know how to respond. I just sat there with the phone in my hand, completely frozen. I wanted to scream at him. Instead, I calmly explained why that wasn't going to happen. I told him what my daily schedule looked like. I told him how many hours I was already working, how mentally draining my job was. I'm an industrial meteorologist. My work is demanding, high stakes, and far from easy. He just shrugged it off. When the call ended, I broke down. I cried harder than I had in years. Not because of money, not because of work, but because I realized in that moment that he didn't see me as a partner. He saw me as a lifeline, something to use and lean on, not someone to build a future with. And still, even after all that, I stayed. Some part of me, the part that still remembered the early days and the inside jokes, wanted to believe he could change, that maybe he had just been in a dark place, that the stress of adulthood had gotten to him and this was just a rough patch. So I gave him another chance. I reached out again. We talked things through. He apologized, or at least gave something close enough to an apology that I accepted it. I wanted to believe him so badly. Eventually, he moved back in with his parents, and this time he actually started working. It was just a part-time retail job, but he was making money. He had a schedule. He had something to do that didn't involve sitting in front of a screen all day. I tried to be supportive. I encouraged him. I praised every little bit of effort, and slowly, I felt myself relaxing. For the first time in a while, it felt like maybe he was finally starting to grow up. I went back to being the supportive girlfriend. I bought him things. I sent him money occasionally, just like before. Even though he had an income now, I wanted to reward the progress. That's what it felt like. Progress. He even started saving up for a trip to see me. After months of being apart, we finally made it happen. We pooled our money and booked a flight. He was going to stay with me for 4 days. I was nervous but hopeful. I cleaned my apartment, planned a few simple dates, picked out some restaurants I thought he'd enjoy. I wanted this visit to be the start of something better. When he arrived, it was nice. Really nice. He looked healthier. He talked about his job and the weird customers he had to deal with. We laughed about silly things like we used to. He took me out to eat for the first time ever with his own money. That felt huge. Like maybe this was the person I had been waiting for. For 2.5 days, I let myself believe it. I let myself forget the nights I cried alone. I let myself ignore the bitterness I had buried deep down. I let myself hope. Then everything shattered. It was late at night. He was taking a shower, and I was curled up in bed scrolling through my phone. His phone was charging on the nightstand. I didn't mean to look. I really didn't. But the screen lit up with a Discord notification, and I couldn't help but glance over. It said, "When are you gonna leave her?" I froze. My body went numb. My heart sank into my stomach. That one sentence told me everything. It wasn't a joke. It wasn't innocent. I didn't even know who she was, but I knew what it meant. I stared at his phone for what felt like an hour, trying to breathe, trying not to panic. I could hear the shower running, and every second felt like a countdown. I didn't storm into the bathroom. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I smiled. A fake, bitter smile. And waited. When he came out, I was calm. Too calm. He asked me if I was okay. I said yes. We talked. We watched a little TV. He didn't notice the difference, but something inside me had snapped. I hated him, fully and completely, but I wasn't going to show it yet. That night, he tried to initiate sex. I politely said no. I could barely stand the sight of him. He looked disappointed but didn't push. He rolled over and fell asleep, and while he slept peacefully beside me, I made a decision. As soon as I was sure he was asleep, I reached across the bed, unplugged his phone, and started scrolling. My hands were shaking. My heart was pounding. So loud I was scared it would wake him, but I had to know the truth. I had to see it for myself. The Discord message wasn't a fluke. It was just the surface. I opened his chat with the girl and started reading. Message after message, stacked in endless threads. They had been talking for months, not just friendly conversation, but full-on cheating, flirting, sexting, trash-talking, me behind my back. It felt like being stabbed over and over again, one sentence at a time. He had started this thing with her around the same time I told him I couldn't pay his rent. That realization hit me the hardest. The second I stopped being useful to him, he moved on. Not only that, but he twisted the story. In their messages, he claimed I was emotionally abusive. He told her I was manipulative, that I was lazy and selfish. The same things he used to say about his parents, he now said about me. And then I found something even worse. He had sent her my nudes, private pictures I had trusted him with. He sent them so they could mock me together, picking apart my body, making fun of how I looked, laughing at things I had once shared in confidence. I put the phone down for a second, just to stop myself from screaming. I felt physically ill, like I wanted to throw up or break something, but I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't wake him up or demand answers. I kept reading. I read hundreds of messages, probably over 100,000 in total. Every paragraph made me hate him more. Every comment pushed me further from the person I used to be and closer to someone I never thought I could become. Someone cold, someone vengeful, someone who was done being quiet. By the time I finally put his phone down, it was nearly morning. I had barely slept, but I didn't let it show. When he woke up, I acted like nothing had changed. I smiled. I offered him coffee. I made breakfast. He sat at my desk, eating my food and playing RuneScape on my computer like he had not just shattered everything we had built. It was surreal. He looked like a stranger in my home. I drove him to the airport and gave him a fake hug goodbye. He kissed me on the cheek and told me he'd miss me. I smiled and waved. As soon as I got back home, I closed the door and collapsed on the floor. I sobbed, angry, broken sobs, the kind that scrape your throat raw. I screamed into a pillow. I kicked my bed so hard the frame cracked. The pain was unbearable, but I wasn't going to let it end there. I wanted him to feel something too. Something real, something that would leave a scar. So I sat down at my computer, wiped my tears, and opened RuneScape. We had a shared account. Not just any account, but one we treated like a little project, a digital child, something we built together from scratch. We both trained it, logged into it, celebrated level-ups together. For years, it was one of the few things that actually felt collaborative between us. We even used to joke about how, if we ever broke up, he'd take half the bank, and I'd take the other half. That joke stuck with me. So I logged into that account and took what I considered my half. Then I took his half too. I transferred my share over to my main account, just like we always joked about. But his share, I gave it away, every single coin. I found random players all over the game and handed out gold like I was hosting a charity. Drive. For items that couldn't be traded directly, I used in-game spells to convert them to coins, and then gave those away too. When I was done, the bank was empty. But I wasn't done. I remembered that I still had the credentials to his main account, the one he had been building for more than a decade. He had asked me to train his farming skill a few times in the past and had written the login info down for me on a piece of paper. I found it in my desk drawer. Still intact. Still working. I logged in. His RuneScape world opened up in front of me. That account was his baby. 14 years of grinding, collecting, and perfecting. It was immaculate, wealthy, fully geared. The kind of account that would make other players stop and admire. And in that moment, I became the Grim Reaper of his digital life. I started with the bank. I sold everything. I mean everything. Armor, weapons, rare pets, cosmetics, supplies. If it had value, I dumped it into the grand exchange and turned it into coins. It took hours. I was meticulous. He was still in the air, probably thinking about what he'd have for dinner, while I was wiping out his legacy piece by piece. By the end, I had over 8.5 billion gold. Then came the fun part. I contacted an old friend in the game, a guy who had always collected something absurd: burnt food. In RuneScape, burnt food has no use. You can't eat it, sell it, or really do anything with it. But it's tradable. He had thousands of burnt food items stored away. When I asked him for the most ridiculous item he owned, he offered me 6,000 burnt spider-on-shaft items. Perfect. I gave him over 2 billion gold for them and left satisfied. Then I dropped every single burnt spider into my ex's bank. That's all that remained where once stood gear worth literal billions. Useless, dead spiders. A graveyard of disappointment. And I still had gold to burn. I had over 6 billion gold left after the spider drop, and I wasn't about to let a single coin go to waste, so I decided to treat myself. After all, I was the one who had been supporting him, emotionally and financially, for years. If anyone deserved a reward, it was me. The first thing I did was buy bonds. In RuneScape, bonds are items you can trade or redeem for in-game membership. Each bond gives you 2 weeks of membership, and I didn't hold back. I bought 100 of them and sent them to my own account. That's nearly 4 years of paid membership, just sitting there, completely funded by his own hoarded wealth. Then I splurged. I went on the Grand Exchange and spent like a queen. I bought top-tier gear from my own account. Weapons I had only dreamed of using. Rare armor sets that would make any player jealous. I filled my bank with everything I had once considered a luxury. I even bought massive stacks of expensive skilling supplies, just to power level something I had always put off because of the cost. I could picture him opening his account later, confused about the missing items, wondering if his account had been hacked. Slowly realizing that the only person who ever had his login info was me. I smiled every time I imagined his face, the panic, the heartbreak, the realization that I was done being used. Once the shopping spree ended, I looked at his bank again. There was still a little money left, about 150,000 gold, practically nothing in RuneScape terms. I walked over to the Grand Exchange area and found a player cooking pizzas. I traded the gold to him. Just like that, every last coin was gone. But I wasn't finished. I picked up a random pile of bones someone had dropped on the ground and left it in his bank. That was it. That was the final item. One single bone. No context, no explanation. Just emptiness and insult. Then I remembered something else. His account was what players call a pure. That means he never trained his defense skill. It's a strategy used to keep a character's combat level low while maximizing offensive abilities. It takes discipline and planning. It's not something you mess up by accident, so I leveled his defense to 6-1, tiny little mistake that would ruin years of calculated play. That single move destroyed the integrity of his build forever. His account was no longer what it had been. It wasn't elite, it wasn't special, it was ruined, beyond repair unless he started all over. And I still wasn't done. After all the damage I had already done, I could have stopped. I could have logged off and let that be the end of it. But when someone uses you, lies to you, shares your most private photos, and acts like none of it matters, you don't just stop at damage. You go for destruction. He had spent billions of gold and years of time building his in-game house. I had seen it many times when we used to play together. It was actually impressive. Fully furnished, filled with rare decorations, built room by room with expensive upgrades. It was something he had taken great pride in, one of the few things in his life he had actually committed to. So I deleted it. Every single room, every item, every servant and layout and upgrade. Gone in minutes. Years of effort, wiped out. RuneScape doesn't offer any sort of house insurance. Once it's deleted, that's it. There's no backup, no undo button. Just a patch of dirt where something beautiful used to be, and that dirt was exactly what he deserved. Then I opened his friends list. I scanned through the names, dozens of them. Some people I remembered, most I didn't. A few of them were online. I picked a handful who were still active and messaged them as if I were him. I told them he had cheated on his girlfriend and was proud of it. I didn't even care if they believed it. I just wanted the idea planted, the stain on his reputation, the hint of drama. For the rest of his list, I did the simplest thing of all. I removed them. Every friend, every contact, gone. His social circle in the game, gone. His support system, gone. He would log in and see a list of empty slots. No one to message. No one to ask for help. I paused for a moment after that. It had all happened so fast, but every click felt satisfying. It wasn't just about the game anymore. It was about taking back control, about sending a message that I wasn't the weak, quiet girl he could lie to and walk all over. Then I remembered one last thing I could do. RuneScape lets you change your username once a month. It's a small detail, but to some players, your name is everything. His was recognizable. It had weight, a little bit of clout. He had used it for years and refused to ever change it. So I changed it for him. I picked a new name that would humiliate him. I won't say what it was, but I used all 12 characters wisely. It was something cruel, something obvious, and something no one would ever forget. If he didn't act fast, his old username would be up for grabs, and you can guess what I plan to do if it becomes available. By the time I logged out, there was nothing left. The bank was empty. His account was corrupted. His house was destroyed. His social circle was gone. His name was a joke. And all of it had been done calmly, methodically, and while he was completely unaware. That night, after everything was done, he sent me a message. It came hours after his flight landed. I could tell from the timestamp that he had finally logged in and realized what had happened. His words were frantic, angry, spiteful. He accused me of betrayal, of violating his trust, of ruining something he had worked his whole life for. Then he sent pictures of himself crying. Real tears, puffy eyes, messy hair. Like I was supposed to feel bad for him. Like he hadn't cheated on me, lied to me, taken advantage of my generosity for years, as if sharing my nudes with some girl on Discord was somehow less cruel than what I had done. In return, I didn't reply right away. I took my time. Then I wrote the coldest, most calculated message I have ever sent in my life. I told him we were over, permanently, that I had seen everything, that I knew about the messages, the photos, the lies, and that I wasn't going to just sit and let it all slide. I also told him that if he ever contacted me again, I would consider taking legal action. I threatened him with a cease and desist. Told him I had documented everything, that if I wanted to, I could report him for distributing private images without consent, and that he should think very carefully before trying to message me again. Truthfully, I don't plan to go to court. I don't want more drama. I don't want revenge in real life. I just wanted to scare him enough that he would never reach out again, and it worked. He hasn't said a word since. It's strange, the mix of emotions I feel now. There's still pain, there's still sadness, but it's cleaner than before. It's not tangled in confusion or guilt. It's sharp and quiet. And in that stillness, I've found peace. He took years of my life. I gave him money, love, loyalty, and patience. He repaid me with betrayal, so I took the only thing he truly valued and turned it into dust. Not because I'm evil, but because I'm done letting people treat me like I'm disposable. And now, on to the next story. I had my best friend arrested for sleeping with my girlfriend. I never thought I'd be the kind of person to share something like this, but maybe telling this story is the only way to let it go, or maybe deep down, I just want someone to understand how everything fell apart. Rachel and I grew up together. We met when we were around 6 or 7, and from that point on, it felt like we were always in each other's lives. By the time we turned 16, we were dating. At 18, we moved to the city for work, and by 20, we were married. We even bought our first house together. Everything felt solid, like we were building something permanent. At 22, Rachel got pregnant. We were going to have a boy. I remember how excited we were, planning the nursery and talking about names. It was one of the happiest times of my life. Then it ended, completely and without warning. 5 weeks before she was supposed to start maternity leave, Rachel went in. For another day at work. She never came home. A massive shelving unit collapsed on her. It killed her instantly. Our son, too. There was nothing anyone could do. 2 of her co-workers survived, but barely. One was paralyzed. The other lost a leg. Later, I found out the company had ignored safety warnings. They were supposed to replace the shelving months before, but they chose to cut costs instead. They saved a few dollars, and I lost the love of my life and our unborn child. The company offered a settlement. They called it compensation. I called it blood money. I wasn't interested in keeping quiet or letting them avoid responsibility. I took them to court and made sure the story was heard. It took 3 years, but it was worth it. The case drew media attention. Politicians got involved. The company paid fines, fired executives, and even saw some of them go to jail. I received a payout that was 10 times higher than their original offer, but no amount of money could fill the hole Rachel left behind. During all of that, I kept working. I was in telecommunications and constantly traveling. My mother moved in with me during those years. She cooked, she cleaned, she kept me from falling apart. If it weren't for her, I don't know what would have happened to me. Eventually, I asked my company to let me work part-time from my hometown. I needed something familiar. They agreed. I started splitting my time between the city, the road, and my old town. A year later, I bought a house back in that town. It wasn't big, just enough for one person to find some peace. I thought I could build something quiet, something new. I didn't know it yet, but that house would become the stage for everything that came next. For a while, life felt calm again. Not happy exactly, but manageable. I had my routines. I traveled for work, came back to my small hometown house, visited with my mother, kept to myself. It wasn't joy, but it was quiet. After everything I'd been through, that was enough. Then Harry showed up. He was the managing director of our hometown branch and an old acquaintance from childhood. We hadn't been close growing up, but after I moved back, we reconnected. He was outgoing and full of energy, the kind of guy who could host a barbecue on short notice and still make everyone feel welcome. We became good friends, or at least, I thought we did. One Friday, I had just gotten back from a long trip when Harry invited me to a small party he was throwing that night. I wasn't in the mood at first, but something told me I needed to go. Maybe I just didn't want to be alone that evening. That's when I met Catherine. She was new in town, recently hired at our branch. Harry introduced us, and we hit it off immediately. She was friendly, smart, funny, and somehow, in ways I still can't explain, she reminded me of Rachel. Not in the way she looked or spoke, just the feeling she gave me. That comfort, that ease. We started talking more after that night. Then came coffee dates, then dinners. Slowly, cautiously, we started seeing each other. I kept expecting it to feel wrong, but it didn't. It felt like the first time in years that I could breathe without guilt sitting on my chest. 2 years passed like that. I took things slow, but eventually, I asked her to move in with me. She said yes. I made space in the house, rearranged the furniture, even cleared out a closet. It felt like another fresh start. My parents liked her. Even Rachel's parents, who had stayed in touch, said they were glad I was doing better. I don't know if they meant it completely, but I appreciated the sentiment. For a while, things were good. We cooked together. We laughed together. She left little notes in my suitcase when I traveled for work. They always made me smile. We weren't a perfect couple, but we were building something that looked a lot like happiness. I let myself believe it. That was my mistake. It started slowly, so slowly that I didn't notice it at first. The first change came in the form of shorter calls. I would be out of town for work, and our usual video chats would end abruptly. She'd say she was tired, or that something came up. I brushed it off. Everyone gets busy sometimes. Then my neighbors started making comments. One mentioned seeing a car parked in the alley behind my house on nights when I was away. Another described it in passing, saying it looked like Harry's. I laughed it off, said he probably just swung by to drop something off. But then it happened again, and again. I found clothes that didn't belong to me in the laundry, a hoodie, some socks, a gym towel. I asked her about them. She smiled and said Harry had been stopping by to talk business. He must have left them behind, nothing more than that. I wanted to believe her. I really did, but something felt off. The house didn't feel the same when I walked into it after a long trip. There was a tension in the air, a silence that wasn't peaceful. I started to feel like a guest in my own home, but every time I brought it up, she brushed me off, told me I was being paranoid, that I was imagining things, and for a while, I believed her. I thought maybe I was projecting. After all, I'd been through a lot. Maybe I was still holding on to grief. Maybe I didn't know how to trust people anymore. That belief lasted until the day I came home early. I had just closed a major contract with a new client. The trip wrapped up 2 days ahead of schedule. Instead of staying in the city, I booked an early flight and decided to surprise her. I thought it would be a sweet moment. I'd walk in, kiss her hello, maybe cook dinner together like we used to. As I drove into town, I remembered the comments from my neighbors, the ones about the car in the alley. So instead of pulling into my driveway, I circled around to the back entrance. That's when I saw it. Harry's car, parked in the alley behind my house. It wasn't parked like a guest's car. It was tucked in close to the hedge, hidden from the street. My stomach dropped. I sat in the car, staring at it, hoping I was wrong, praying that there was some innocent explanation, but I already knew. I got out and walked toward the back gate, quietly, carefully, and then I looked through the kitchen window. They were in there, together, in my kitchen. On my counter, Catherine and Harry were having sex like they didn't have a care in the world. I didn't make a sound. I didn't knock on the glass. I didn't shout. I just stood there, frozen, watching. My heart felt like it had stopped beating. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. Eventually, I turned and walked back to my car. I sat in the driver's seat and stared at the dashboard. I had been here before. Not this exact situation, but this exact feeling. That moment when your life changes in an instant and nothing will ever be the same. I wanted to cry, but I couldn't. I was numb. And then, as the minutes passed, the numbness gave way to something else. Anger. Cold, steady, and sharp. Not the kind of anger that lashes out in the moment. The kind that waits. The kind that plans. I didn't want to scream. I wanted them to suffer. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. Catherine was home by the time I arrived. She greeted me like everything was normal, smiled, hugged me, asked how my trip went. I smiled back, kissed her on the cheek, and lied just as easily. We had dinner together like we always did. I even asked about her week. She told me about work, gossiped about co-workers, told me she missed me. It was almost impressive. Almost. She went to bed early, said she was tired. I told her I'd join her later. Instead, I sat in my home office and started planning. I didn't want to just end things. That would be too simple, too easy. I wanted them both to feel something deeper. I wanted them to lose, something they cared about. I wanted to leave a mark. Harry made it easy. He had a drug habit, not the kind that makes headlines, but enough that he kept it hidden. Weed, some coke. I knew about it because I'd accidentally seen it once at his place. He quickly covered it up. I pretended not to notice. Back then, I didn't care. But now, that secret was going to be useful. I called a few contacts, people I had worked with in the past, not the clean-cut ones, the ones who didn't mind crossing a few lines. I asked if they had anything they were willing to part with. Small amounts, just enough to make something believable. Within a few days, I had what I needed. I waited about a month, kept everything normal on the outside. Then, one weekend, I invited a few people over for a barbecue, Harry included. It went exactly as I hoped. We grilled. We drank. I made sure Harry drank more than usual, laughed with him, shared stories, told him how grateful I was to have a friend like him. He ate it up. When it got late, I told him to crash on the couch. He agreed. That night, while he was passed out, I planted the drugs in his car. I also placed some of my personal items around, his trunk and glove box. These were things I had quietly removed from my house earlier, intending to report them as stolen. The biggest stash went into the spare tire compartment. I knew he wouldn't find it. Not anytime soon. The next day, I offered to drive him home. He was hungover and didn't argue. Once there, I followed him into the house under the excuse of needing to use the bathroom. While he groaned on the couch, I slipped a few more items into his apartment. Nothing flashy, just enough to create a trail. Step one was done. Now I had to make it look like something had been taken. A few days later, I packed a small bag, smashed a glass panel on my back door, and flew out of town for work. I made sure to leave the door open just enough for someone to find it. The moment I landed, I had several messages waiting. One from my mom, one from Catherine, one from the local police. My mom had gone to check on the house and found the broken door. She called the cops. Catherine was in tears. The police wanted me to come in and give a statement. I called them all back. Told them I was on a business trip and would be home in a week. Asked my dad to help organize a security system install just in case. Everyone agreed it was a smart move. When I got back, I made a show of checking every room. I pointed out what was missing, filled out a report. Then I had the security company walk us through the new system. That was when Catherine asked the question I had been waiting for. What if we want to do something private? Like, in the house? Are the cameras always recording? The technician smiled. Said a lot of people ask that. Showed us how to turn off certain cameras through the home computer. Then he showed me how to set up notifications for when someone tried to disable the system. He had no idea he was helping me build the next trap. Everything was moving according to plan. But there was one more thing I had to be sure of before I pulled the trigger. I needed to protect myself legally. I had no idea if Catherine might try to come after me for money once things ended. We'd been living together for a while, and I didn't want any surprises, especially not involving Rachel's estate. I turned to an online legal advice forum and explained my situation in broad terms. They pointed me toward a local attorney. I met with him the next day. He walked me through everything. Turns out, despite living together, Catherine and I hadn't crossed the line into a legal partnership. In our country, there are specific rules for when a couple is considered de facto. We hadn't lived together long enough. She didn't pay rent. I paid all utilities. None of her official documents listed my address. Legally speaking, she had no claim to anything. Still, I asked the lawyer to draw up a document, something official and airtight, just in case she tried to stir up trouble later. He agreed. Now that I was protected, it was time for the final setup. Around this time, I got news from my company. They offered me a major promotion. It meant I'd no longer have to travel constantly. I'd be running the team from our city headquarters. They were even considering expanding our presence in the surrounding towns based on the success I'd had. It was everything I wanted, a clean break from the past, a real future, and it gave me the perfect timeline. I had 6 weeks before the transfer would go through. 6 weeks to finalize everything. First, I spoke to Harry. Told him I was thinking about proposing to Catherine. Asked if he could quietly approve her vacation time for a surprise trip I was planning. I wanted to send her and 2 friends to a tropical spa resort for a week. Harry grinned and gave me a hug. Said it was about time. I smiled back, knowing exactly what he was really hugging. He approved the leave without question. Later that night, I told Catherine the good news. She screamed when I handed her the booking confirmation. All expenses paid, no questions asked. A full week away with 2 friends at one of the best resorts in the region. She asked why I was doing it. I told her I was getting ready for something big. I said I couldn't join her because of work, but that she'd understand everything when she got back. She hugged me so tight I almost couldn't breathe. It was the best lie I ever told. She had no idea she'd never see me again. The moment she left town, everything went into motion. She and her friends left on a Sunday. They were packed and excited, laughing as they climbed into the car. Catherine kissed me goodbye and said she couldn't wait to see what I had planned when she returned. I smiled and told her it would be unforgettable. She had no idea how right she was. As soon as they were out of sight, I packed my own bags, not for a business trip, not for a client, for freedom. I had already arranged 2 weeks of personal leave. I flew across the country and checked into a small cabin by the coast. Just me, the ocean, and time to breathe. I turned my phone off. I wanted no part of the fallout until everything was done. While I was gone, I kept tabs on the house through the security system. My cameras sent alerts anytime one of them was turned off. I had set the system to email me every time someone tried to disable even one feed. Catherine had asked how to do that for privacy reasons. I knew exactly what she meant, and just like clockwork, the alerts came in. Every few nights, the same pattern. Certain cameras off, hours of silence, then the cameras turned back on. Harry wasn't being subtle. After 2 weeks of recorded proof, I booked my flight home. On the way back, I stopped just outside of town. I didn't go straight to my house. Instead, I circled around to the alley, behind it. Same as before. Harry's car was there, right on schedule. I parked a few houses away and made my first call. I blocked my number and told the local police that I was a neighbor. I said I'd noticed a man sitting in a car behind my neighbor's house, that he kept handing things through his window to people in passing vehicles, that I was concerned. He might be dealing drugs. Then I gave them the license plate. They told me someone would check it out. Next, I called Catherine. I told her I was on my way home, said I couldn't wait to see her before she flew back to the city, said I'd be there in 10 minutes. From my phone, I watched the camera feed. It was chaos. Within seconds, Harry was throwing on clothes, grabbing his things, bolting through the back door. He jumped into his car and tore down the alley. He didn't make it far. A police cruiser rounded the corner at the perfect moment. They flipped their lights on and followed him. I watched from a distance as they pulled him over. Meanwhile, I pulled into my driveway, calm and collected. Catherine greeted me with a nervous smile. She had no idea that her little secret was already unraveling. That night, we went through the motions. Dinner, small talk, bedtime. She fell asleep quickly. I didn't sleep at all. The next morning, Catherine and her friends left for the airport. They had no idea it would be the last time they saw that house as it was. I waited until they were gone, then started packing. I had already called a friend of mine who worked for a moving company. He showed up with a team that afternoon. I apologized for the short notice, but he didn't ask questions. I had everything organized, labeled boxes, instructions on what to send to storage and what to take with me to the city. I didn't pack any of Catherine's things. I had already done that. Her belongings were boxed and placed in a separate unit I had rented under her name. I left a key and access details in a sealed envelope. Later that day, the police called me. They had arrested Harry, They said he had been pulled over for suspicious behavior, and during the search, they found drugs in his car. Some of the items matched the ones I had reported stolen weeks earlier. When they searched his apartment, they found more. They asked if I could come in to identify the property. I told them I'd be right there. When I showed up, I made a show of going through everything. I identified what was mine, acted surprised, acted grateful. They said an investigation would follow, but that Harry was being charged with multiple offenses. The town lit up with gossip. Harry was fired within the week. Word spread quickly, especially in a small place like ours. People talked, people whispered, and just like that, his reputation vanished. I made one last visit before leaving town. I went to my parents' house and sat down with them. I told them everything, minus the details I didn't think they needed to know. I told them I had been promoted and was moving back to the city. I told them Catherine wouldn't be coming with me. They were surprised, maybe even a little disappointed, that I hadn't come to them sooner, but they supported me. We shared drinks that night. We laughed a little. We cried a little. I hugged them both before heading back out. There was one final stop. I went to Becky's place. Becky had been Rachel's best friend growing up. She was the only person I had trusted with the full story. She helped me with the storage unit and made sure everything was ready for what came next. I handed her a sealed manila envelope. Inside was everything Catherine needed to know. Proof of the cheating, copies of the security footage, a letter from my lawyer, a note explaining how to collect her belongings, and one final message from me. She wouldn't be hearing from me again. I drove back to the city that night. No stops, no second thoughts. The moment I crossed the city line, it felt like something had lifted, like the weight I'd been carrying for years had finally been set down. I turned my phone back on the next morning. There were missed calls, dozens of them, voicemails, texts, all from Catherine. She had come back early. Someone tipped her off that something was going on back in town. She showed up to find the house completely empty. For rent sign out front. Locks changed. Her key didn't work anymore. Panicked, she went to my parents' house. They didn't let her in, didn't even let her finish speaking, just closed the doctor in her face. Eventually, she got in touch with Becky. Becky told her she had a package to deliver. I never heard her exact reaction, but based on the messages that followed, I can imagine. She accused me of setting up Harry, of lying, of being manipulative and cruel. She called me a coward. She begged for explanations, then demanded them, then begged again. I didn't reply. She never came to the city. I never saw her again. From what I've heard, she was transferred out of state soon after. The gossip had gotten too loud. People talked. People pointed. Her work reassigned her to administrative tasks until things cooled down. Then they moved her. As for Harry, last I checked, he was facing charges. It was his first offense, so he probably wouldn't serve long, maybe just a few months, but his career is over. His reputation is gone. He won't be coming back to that town anytime soon. People have asked me if I feel guilty. Honestly, no. Harry knew what I had lost. He knew what Rachel meant to me. He saw how long it took me to climb out of that hole, and he still chose to betray me. Catherine looked me in the eye every day and lied. She kissed me and lied. She built a future with me on top of a lie. I didn't hurt them. I didn't scream. I didn't hit anyone. I didn't burn their things or break their windows. I simply pulled the curtain back and let the truth do the damage. Some people say revenge is petty, but sometimes it's the only way to close a chapter. And now, on to the next story. He thought he could beat the system like he beat his wife. Let's call him Joe. That wasn't his real name, of course, but he doesn't deserve the dignity of being remembered by it. What he does deserve is what happened to him, every single ounce of it. You see, Joe was a wife-beater, not just once, not just during a moment of rage. Joe built his entire identity on control, intimidation, and fists. He was the kind of man who thought fear was a language and pain was a sentence. I didn't meet Joe through a criminal case. I met him through civil court, through vengeance disguised as a legal proceeding. My client was Joe's former brother-in-law, the brother of the woman Joe used to hurt. He had his own reasons for coming to me. A failed business partnership with Joe had left him financially damaged. Emotionally, he was wrecked. Imagine watching your sister get crushed and manipulated by someone like that. But this wasn't about healing. This was about justice. I took the case not because it was easy, but because it felt personal the moment I read the first line of the complaint. Joe had spent years believing he could break people, lie to judges, scare off attorneys. It had always worked. Threats, tears, staged, remorse. He had weaponized them all. He even got away with a child support-free divorce from my client's sister. But not this time. This time, he met someone more stubborn, more meticulous, and far more patient than he ever anticipated. He met me. When we filed the lawsuit, Joe barely reacted. He walked into that courtroom like it was a formality, a little speed bump in his day. He didn't even hire a lawyer at first. He genuinely believed he could bluff his way through. That had worked for him before, so why not again? But he had no idea who he was dealing with. I wasn't just an attorney. I was the end of his charade. Joe walked into court with that smug little smile I've seen on too many men like him. The kind who think that truth is optional and consequences are just for people without fists. He lied under oath, boldly, repeatedly, without blinking. He told the judge outrageous stories that contradicted documented facts. He faked receipts, doctored emails, and even brought in a so-called witness who turned out to be a friend from his drinking days. None of it worked, because while Joe was playing games and performing for the courtroom, I was building a wall around him. Every lie he told made that wall taller. Every false document gave me one more brick to seal his fate. I kept calm. I kept quiet. I let him talk himself deeper into the hole while I prepared to bury him in it. When the judgment came down, it wasn't small. It wasn't symbolic. It was massive. Far more than Joe could ever dream of paying. The look on his face when the number was read out loud was the first real moment of silence I ever saw from him. He wasn't just shocked. He was cornered. He tried everything to wriggle out of it, transferring property to friends, creating shell companies, pretending to be broke. It was all so clumsy, so desperate. He thought he could hide things from me. But I had already seen his type before. Guys like Joe always underestimate how far a lawyer will go when you make it personal. I tracked down every asset he had. Bank accounts, vehicles, investments, rental properties. He tried to get clever, but it didn't matter. I had investigators watching his every move. He blinked, and we were already 3 steps ahead. He stalled for years, but the clock always runs out. Piece by piece, I dismantled his financial life. Every account was frozen, every hiding place exposed. He'd built his life on control, but now he couldn't control anything at all. He was slipping. Fast. Eventually, Joe was left with one thing, just one property that hadn't been touched. It was a small rental house, and it became his entire world. He clung to it like a lifeline. The upstairs was rented out, and he lived in the unfinished basement. That rent money was the only cash he had coming in. He couldn't open a bank account without me finding it and garnishing it immediately, so he cashed the rent checks at payday. Loan shops. The fees were brutal, but that was the cost of staying invisible. For a while, he managed to keep that house hidden. Technically, he didn't own it directly. It was under a numbered company. He probably thought he was being clever. But my investigator followed him one day, watched where he went after a court hearing, and that's how we found it. His precious little hideaway. From that point forward, it was a slow and deliberate process. Joe represented himself, hoping to stall. He tried to claim that the property had nothing to do with him. He created layers of fake ownership, filed paperwork that made no sense, and leaned hard on technicalities. But I was patient. I pierced through every fraudulent transfer, every corporate veil. I knew exactly what he was doing, and the court knew it too. Eventually, the house was mine. Or rather, it was my client's, through a nominee. The day we took possession, Joe was out buying cigarettes. When he came back, the sheriff had already changed the locks. He stood outside that house, the same house he had once used to control tenants and scrape by. Now he couldn't even get into his own basement. His lawyer, a local guy working for free, called me, said Joe had nowhere else to go, asked if maybe we could let him stay in the basement. I told him the truth. It wasn't my decision anymore. The new owner didn't want him back, and the new owner was one of my client's employees. That house, the last thing Joe owned on earth, was no longer his. Just like that, the man who used to walk into rooms with a swagger was now homeless. Except for one thing. He still had his truck. Joe's truck was a monster. Big, loud, rusted, out, and barely running. The kind of thing that guzzled gas faster than he could afford it. But it was his last possession. His last shred of control. He started living in that truck, parking it wherever he could, trying to pretend he still had some dignity left. It wasn't worth seizing. Too old. Too beat up. I had no interest in taking it away from him. Honestly, letting him keep it felt like a final kindness. Something to remind him of what he used to have. That was, until he made the mistake. One afternoon, I got a call from the tenants at the house he used to own. The one we had seized. Joe had come back. He had parked his truck across the driveway, completely blocking them in. He wasn't there to visit. He wasn't there to talk. He had done it out of spite, just pure pathetic anger. After parking, he stormed off into town, shouting that he'd be back later to sleep in the truck. I asked the tenant if they could get around it. They couldn't. He had parked it in a way that made sure no one could come or go. So I made a call. Back. In my criminal defense days, I used to work with a lot of tow truck drivers. I called one of the guys I still trusted, gave him specific instructions. In a few hours, that truck was gone. Not crushed, not impounded, just moved. But I had it parked somewhere meaningful. The next morning, Joe's lawyer called me. He wasn't happy. My client wants his truck back, he said. I told him it wasn't going to happen. Joe had no right to block someone's driveway. He had pushed too far, and this time there would be a consequence. You have no legal right to that truck, he said. And he had no right to harass tenants, I replied. We were at a standoff. Joe's lawyer threatened court, said they'd be filing papers that afternoon, said Joe was on his way to sign an affidavit. But I wasn't worried. I already had a plan. The next morning was perfect. Bright, calm, quiet. I stood by my office window, 15 stories up, sipping coffee and looking down at the parking lot below. The phone rang. I already knew who it was. Before I picked up, it was Joe's lawyer. You think this is funny? He snapped. Why didn't you tell me the truck was parked right outside my office? I smiled. Is that so? I said, as if I didn't already know. I could see the truck from where I stood, right there in the lot, right in front of the lawyer's building. How careless of my tow guy, I added. I really must speak to him. Joe's lawyer wasn't amused. My client's going to sue. No, he's not, I replied. He's going to get in his truck and drive away. Right now. There was silence for a moment. Then I explained that the tow guy had even filled up the tank and done an oil change. All of it was on the house. A gift, if you will. Tell your client to get in that truck and drive off, I said. Because if I ever see that vehicle again, I will seize it to satisfy the rest of my client's judgment. And this time, there won't be any mercy. He tried to argue. He tried to puff up. But I was done. I ended the call, placed the phone down, and took another sip of my coffee. A few minutes later, I saw movement down below. Joe walked out of the lawyer's office and slowly crossed the parking lot to his truck. I watched him the entire way. There was no anger in his walk, no confidence, no fight, just a man completely broken. There was no bounce in his step anymore. The joy was gone. The fire was gone. He wasn't just homeless or bankrupt. He was emptied out. Completely. A shell. And now, on to the next story. My boss stole my Super Bowl tickets and thought he'd get away with it. I've been a 49ers fan for as long as I can remember. My dad used to talk about Joe Montana like he was a mythological hero. Sundays in our house were sacred. As I got older, the obsession only grew. I became the kind of fan who arrives at the stadium before sunrise, grills in the parking lot, paints his face, and lives for every snap. So when the 49ers made it back to the Super Bowl a few years ago, it felt like my chance to finally witness the dream. At the time, I worked for a consulting firm. It was a decent gig with decent pay. I wasn't some low-level grunt either. I managed a few accounts directly and had built good relationships with my clients. One of those clients stood out from the rest. We clicked right away. He was smart, laid back, and had that rare mix of professionalism and humor. Meetings with him didn't feel like work. We'd often grab drinks afterward and talk about everything from business to football. He knew I was a 49ers lifer. I wore red and gold whenever I could, kept a team flag at my desk, and didn't stop talking about the playoffs. I wasn't subtle about it. So he decided to do something incredible. As a thank you for the work I had done and the friendship we had built, he got his hands on a pair of company Super Bowl tickets. He didn't tell me directly. He gave them to the partner on our account. The plan was to surprise me. Only the surprise never came. I watched the Super Bowl from my living room that year. We lost, which hurt, but I still cheered like a maniac. I had no idea I had ever been meant to be there. Not a clue. Until a few weeks later when I met that same client for drinks. He was casual at first. We chatted about work, football, usual stuff. Then he asked, "Why didn't you go to the game? I heard someone else ended up in your seats." I looked at him, completely confused. "What game?" "The Super Bowl," he said. "You didn't go?" "No," I told him. "I didn't have tickets." He blinked. "Wait, what?" He explained that he had passed the tickets to the partner on our account and told him they were for me. It was supposed to be a surprise. He had wanted to thank me in a big way, but I had never received them. I had no idea they even existed. His expression went flat. Then he leaned in and said quietly, "Ask around. Don't stir anything up yet. Just find out what happened and let me know." So I did. I waited until I was back at the office and kept things low-key. It only took a couple of days before one of the secretaries gave me the missing piece. The partner on our account had given the tickets away. Not to me. Not even to someone in our company. He had handed them off to another one of his personal clients as if they were some corporate gift. That was when I stopped being confused. That was when I started getting angry. I sat with that information. For a day, maybe two, I kept thinking about those seats, 30-yard line, Super Bowl, my team on the biggest stage, and how it was all taken from me by someone who probably thought I'd never find out. Under normal circumstances, I might have let it go. Corporate politics can get messy, and sometimes you just eat the loss to avoid shaking the tree. But this wasn't a missing lunch receipt. This was a once-in-a-lifetime moment, ripped away so someone else could look good on my effort. So I didn't confront him. Not directly. I already knew that the client noticed I wasn't there. He brought it up without any prompting, which meant he was paying attention. That gave me an idea. If I played it smart, I could let him handle it. And if it came from him, it would be impossible to ignore. I pulled out my phone and texted the client. I kept it short. "Hey, just wanted to thank you again for thinking of me with those tickets. It looks like they were given to another one of our clients." The response came back in all caps. "Are you kidding me?" Followed by another message. "Pretend I never told you. Let me handle it." At that moment, I knew I had just lit a fuse. A few days later, we got an email from the client's office asking us to attend an in-person meeting. Not unusual. They often asked for quick face-to-face sessions to review progress. The only twist was that they specifically requested that the partner, yes, the same one who had stolen the tickets, be present for the meeting. He didn't seem to think anything of it. We booked the flight, packed our things, and headed down. Together. He was relaxed, even joking during the ride. I stayed quiet. He had no idea what was waiting for him. We arrived at the client's office and were ushered into a conference room. Most of the usual team was already there. But one person stood out. A woman in her 30s who neither of us recognized. The client stood up and said, "Dickhead partner, this is Stephanie. She's a VP from one of our other departments. She wanted to sit in on this meeting." Then he turned to her and added, "Hey, you two must already know each other from the Super Bowl." Stephanie smiled politely as she reached out to shake my hand. "Oh, I don't think we met. I'm sorry if I forgot." The client chuckled. "Come on, Steph. How much did you drink? They were sitting right next to you." He looked straight at me. I didn't miss a beat. "Sorry, I wasn't there." "Are you sure you're not thinking of someone else?" Dickhead partner shifted in his chair. His posture changed. His smile started to fade. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. Stephanie glanced at him, then casually added, "No, the other seats were taken by those guys from the other company. I was just wondering why they were there. Are we working on something with them?" Silence. She had just named a company that had no connection to our project. They weren't in the same industry. They had no business being at that table. That was when the client turned to him and said, "I gave you those tickets for OP, right?" The partner flushed. His eyes darted around the room. He stammered, "Oh, well, he couldn't make it, so I think he gave them to someone else." He turned to me, hoping I'd play along. I looked at him calmly. "What tickets?" The client raised his voice just a little. "Those tickets were a personal thank you gift from me to OP. Did you give them to someone else?" He paused for a breath. Was it another client? The partner fumbled. Maybe something got mixed up in the office. The room fell quiet, the kind of silence that sucks the oxygen out of the air. The client leaned back in his chair, looked down at his portfolio, calmly gathered his things, and said, "I think this meeting is over." Then he turned to me. "OP, looks like I owe you a thank you gift. Let's go grab lunch. Stephanie, you're welcome to join. Dickhead partner, I need to evaluate our relationship. Please head back home and expect to hear from us next week. Dickhead partner." Tried to recover. "I'd like to come along if that's okay." Stephanie shut him down instantly. "I don't think that's a good idea." She motioned for the front desk to show him out. As soon as the elevator doors closed behind him, the entire room burst out laughing. Turns out Stephanie wasn't a VP. She was just another employee the client had asked to play a part in this little show, and she absolutely nailed it. She even came to lunch with us. Huge Niners fan. Hilarious. And that was only the beginning. The moment we stepped out of the building, my phone buzzed. It was Dickhead partner. His message read, "We need to talk. You need to cover for the firm. We can figure this out when you get back." I stared at the screen and felt something shift in me. This man had taken what was meant for me, lied to our client, dragged me into his mess, and now had the nerve to ask me to protect him. I showed the message to the client during lunch. He laughed, then leaned in. "Don't respond just yet," he said. "We're not done." After we wrapped up lunch at a high-end spot he clearly chose for impact, he laid out what would happen next. He told me exactly what to text the partner in a few hours. Here's what I sent that evening. "Hey, the client expects the following. 1. Payment for the resale value of the Super Bowl tickets. Not face value. Resale, which was well over $10,000. 2. Full reimbursement for today's lunch, which he deliberately made expensive. 3. A direct personal apology to me. 4. A formal written apology to the client's company, which he described as a response to theft. Lastly, he will never speak to you again. You are no longer welcome on anything involving that account." Silence. For hours. Then a single word. Understood. That was it. By the time we returned to the office, word had already spread. The client had called one of the senior partners and laid out everything. And now, dickhead partner was scrambling. He tried to spin it. Tried to say it was a misunderstanding. Claimed he thought I had given the tickets away. Said something about logistics being confused, but no one was buying it. The client's version of the story was clear and backed by multiple people, including Stephanie, who provided a written summary of the meeting and the exchange. The other partners were livid, not just because he jeopardized a key client, but because he had made them look incompetent. He cost them trust, reputation, money. As punishment, they made him pay everything. The tickets, the lunch, the emotional damage control. All of it came directly out of his paycheck. As for me, I came out of it looking clean. I had been professional. I had given the client space to handle it. I hadn't thrown anyone under the bus. I had even offered to go to the meeting with the man who wronged me. That showed restraint, loyalty. But deep down, I was still angry. Because the truth was, the damage had already been done. That game was a once-in-a-lifetime moment. I should have been there. I should have seen the opening kickoff, felt the roar of the crowd, lost my voice cheering on every third down. Instead, I watched from my couch, completely unaware that someone else was sitting in my seat enjoying a moment that was never meant for them. And the person who made that happen still worked one floor above me. After everything blew up, the office felt different. People started treating me with a mix of respect and caution, like I had pulled off some kind of quiet coup. I was no longer just the guy who handled a few accounts. I was the one who stood up to a partner and walked away looking like the only adult in the room. But I wasn't celebrating. Not really. Dickhead partner still had his job. He was embarrassed, sure. He lost access to one of the firm's most important clients. He had to pay out of pocket for what he stole. But he was still walking the halls, still holding meetings, still pretending like nothing had happened. And I had to see him almost every day. He avoided me. Completely. He never apologized, never made eye contact. Just kept his head down and waited for it all to fade, but it didn't, not for me. Even though I had won, the place started to feel tainted. I was never going to forget what had happened. I couldn't sit in meetings and pretend like I trusted the leadership anymore. And honestly, I started wondering what kind of future I had at a firm where someone like that could pull a stunt like this and still hold his title, so I started looking. Quietly, I put out feelers, talked to friends, reached out to some old contacts. I wasn't in a rush, but I was ready. A few months later, an opportunity came up. A better position, higher pay, healthier culture, no internal politics, no inflated egos, and no snakes in suits pretending to have my back. I gave my notice without drama. There was no big speech, no fireworks. Just a simple email thanking the firm for the experience and outlining my transition plan. As I packed up my things on the last day, I ran into one of the other partners, the one who had to clean up after the Super Bowl mess. He shook my hand and said, "You handled yourself well. I hope the new place treats you better." That was the only real acknowledgement I ever got. And honestly, it was enough. I walked out of that office for the last time, feeling like I had finally closed the door on the whole mess. I had taken the high road, but I hadn't let myself be stepped on. I had played it smart, and I had come out stronger. As for the client, he stayed in touch. We'd still grab drinks every now and then. He even mentioned that he eventually cut ties with the firm entirely, said it just didn't feel right working with them anymore. He now works with a close friend of mine at a competing firm, and from what I hear, they're doing great together. To this day, I still get a little bitter when Super Bowl season rolls around. I think about what could have been, what should have been, and how one person's selfishness stole that moment from me. But I also think about how I turned it around, how I exposed him without ever raising my voice, how I didn't let anger ruin my judgment, and how, in the end, I made sure the right people saw what really happened. I still haven't been to a Super Bowl in person. I'm hoping the Niners make another run soon. When they do, I'll be there. And this time, no one is taking my seat.
The case has been heard. The stories have been told. Now it's your turn to judge. Leave your verdict in the comments. Like, share, and subscribe. The Court of Stories is always in session.